Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Lori Slesinski. Lori Slesinski, a 24 years old former Auburn University student, disappeared mysteriously on June 10, 2006, from Auburn, Alabama. Her disappearance occurred after she had confirmed plans to attend a girls' night out at her best friend and coworker's house home. However, she never arrived. Located in eastern Alabama, Auburn is a rapidly growing city with a rich cultural mix and a strong sense of Southern hospitality. It is home to Auburn University, one of the nation's most recognized public universities. Lori was born to parents Casey and Arlene Slesinski on September 21, 1981. She had blue eyes and blonde hair, and her parents and older brother, Paul, adored her. The investigation into Lori's disappearance began with a disturbing discovery. Her dog was left unattended, the air conditioner was still on, and the telephone cord was missing from her home. The police were baffled by the lack of evidence, and Lori's family was left with unanswered questions. Had Lori left town in a hurry, or was something more sinister at play? After 16 years, the mystery of Lori's disappearance was finally solved, but the events surrounding her vanishing remain as puzzling as ever. The family originally came from New York State but later relocated to rural Alabama farm country near Auburn when Lori was 13. Growing up in a country setting with animals, Lori developed a passion for animals. According to her friends, Lori was stunning and enjoyed spending time with friends, watching movies, riding her bicycle, and playing video games. In addition to these leisure activities, she was diligent in her studies and received support from her family. After completing high school, Lori attended Auburn University, majoring in psychology with a minor in criminology. Her parents purchased a mobile home for her in a well-maintained house park popular with students, where she lived off campus with her cherished Yorkshire Terrier, Peanut. Lori maintained a close relationship with her family, and her mother would call her daily to check in. In 2005, Lori graduated with honors from Auburn University. Following graduation, she secured a job at the East Alabama Mental Health Center while still residing in the house park. She also made plans to pursue her master's degree in psychology in the near future. Lori's family was proud of her accomplishments, but they had no idea that something terrible was about to happen. On June 10, 2006, 24-year-old Lori planned a girls' night at her best friend Lindsay Braun's house. They intended to have a few drinks and watch a movie. Lori and Lindsay had met in their junior year at Auburn University and quickly became friends due to Lori's kind, charming, and outgoing personality. After graduating, they both worked at the same mental health facility, which strengthened their bond. At around 6:30 p.m. on June 10th, Lori called Lindsay to say she needed to stop at the store before heading over for their movie night. Unfortunately, Lori never arrived. Lindsay became worried when she didn't hear from Lori again that night or the next day. She called Lori multiple times and left messages on her home answering machine, but Lori never responded. When Lori didn't show up to work on Monday, June 12th, Lindsay's concerns escalated. It was highly unusual for Lori to miss work without informing anyone. After Lori failed to show up to work on Tuesday, June 13th, Lindsay and another colleague visited Lori's home to check on her. When they arrived at the house, Lindsay found the door unlocked and the air conditioning on, which was unusual. Although Lori was nowhere to be found, her dog, Peanut, was in his crate, looking well-fed and content, as if someone had been caring for him. Surprisingly, his crate was clean, despite Lori having been missing for several days. Lindsay felt a sense of unease as she realized it was unusual for Lori to leave her beloved pet alone and unattended. She recalled that Lori had placed 3 rugs on her kitchen floor because the dog refused to walk on the tile. However, when Lindsay entered Lori's home later that day, the rugs were missing, along with the outside trash can. On the same day, June 13, 2006, Lori's mother, Arlene, received a call from Lori's workplace, informing her that Lori had missed work for 2 consecutive days. Arlene immediately tried to contact Lori but was unable to reach her. Growing concerned for her daughter's well-being, Arlene left for Auburn after alerting her husband, Casey, about Lori's disappearance. Upon arriving at Lori's house, Arlene encountered a disturbing scene. The door was slightly ajar, and Lori's bed was perfectly made, but there was no sign of Lori. Her car was also missing. A closer inspection revealed that several items were gone, including the kitchen rugs, a pillow from the couch, a Galileo thermometer, a green trash can that usually held a rake and shovel, and the phone cord for the landline. Arlene's alarm grew as she realized that something was horribly wrong. She officially reported her daughter missing, holding on to the hope that Lori would eventually show up. As the initial investigation into Lori's disappearance began, police searched her house home but found no significant evidence linking to a suspect. However, they did notice signs of a struggle, scuff marks on the wall, and semen on her bedsheet. Additionally, traces of blood were discovered on the doorknob, and a coat hanger and a single golden hoop earring were also found at the scene. On June 10, 2006, police recovered surveillance footage showing Lori stopping at a Walmart in Alabama. This was the last known sighting of her, and no one had any idea what happened to her after that. Later that afternoon, Lori's mother, Arlene, received a phone call from one of Lori's friends, 25-year-old Rick Ennis. Ennis claimed that he had met Lori on the day she went missing and thought she might have gone to make a drug deal. However, Arlene was skeptical of his story, despite knowing Ennis from when Lori invited him to spend Christmas with their family in 2005. Arlene couldn't believe that Lori would be involved in drug dealing and thought Ennis was lying, but she didn't know why he would make up such a story. Police received crucial information from Ennis himself. However, before they could investigate further, Lori's car was found engulfed in flames on a dead-end street near a bowling alley where Ennis used to work. This discovery, made on June 14, 2006, for days after Lori's disappearance, shifted the investigation from a missing persons case to a potential homicide. Unfortunately, the fire destroyed any potential evidence inside the car. Investigators found a hand-rolled cigarette near the vehicle and a gas can in the nearby woods, but Lori was not inside the car. Lori's family was devastated by the discovery, and they feared the worst. The only lead was the information Ennis had provided to Arlene. When questioned, Ennis repeated his story, adding more details. He claimed he and Lori grew marijuana together and speculated that she might have gone to sell her share. Ennis also suggested that Lori may have been involved with shady individuals. Police searched Lori's house thoroughly but found no evidence of her dealing drugs. During the investigation, they noticed scratches on Ennis's hands and arms, which he attributed to his dog. However, when they spoke to Lindsay, they uncovered more suspicious information. Lindsay reported that during her last phone conversation with Lori on the day she disappeared, she heard Rick Ennis speaking in the background. At the time, Lindsay didn't think much of it, as she knew Ennis was a friend of Lori's. Lindsay stated that when she asked Ennis about Lori's whereabouts via text, he replied that Lori was fine when he last saw her. Additionally, Lindsay told investigators that before Lori went missing, Lori mentioned that Ennis had written her a love letter, but Lori did not feel the same way. Lori had planned to talk to Ennis about her lack of romantic interest in him. Later, it was discovered that Ennis had told his friends about the love letter and Lori's rejection. When confronted with this new information, Ennis admitted to meeting Lori hours before her disappearance but claimed she was fine getting ready to go shopping when he left her house. However, investigators found inconsistencies in Ennis's statement, which raised suspicions. As a result, Rick Ennis became the prime suspect. The investigation led to a search of his car, where a knife, cleaning supplies, and handcuffs were found. Investigators kept collecting evidence by looking into Ennis's past, but they were about to encounter some unexpected surprises. Looking into Rick Ennis's dark past, investigators found that at the age of 12, he had murdered his mother and stepfather. The incident occurred on March 3, 1993, in North Montgomery, Alabama, where the family resided in a house. Ennis's mother, known for her kind and church-going nature, was first shot in the face and then beaten to death with a baseball bat. His stepfather, Eddie Joe Flowers, nicknamed Elvis due to his resemblance to the musician, met a similar fate. Upon returning home from work, Eddie was shot in the face with a shotgun by Rick. Following the murders, Ennis took the family car and crashed it into a fence along the highway. Alabama State Trooper John Clark encountered Ennis walking along the highway and inquired about his parents' whereabouts. Ennis confessed to killing them. A search of his backpack revealed a kitchen knife and ammunition for a 12-gauge shotgun and a .22 caliber. When questioned about his motives, the 12-year-old Ennis showed no emotion and explained that he was upset about his parents' plan to move, which would require him to change schools. Investigators believe Ennis lived with the bodies for 2 days, during which time he continued to attend school. He also confessed to planning to kill his 3 stepsisters, which shocked investigators. However, because of his age, he was tried as a minor and sentenced to 9 years in jail for the double murder. After his release, he moved to Auburn, where he met Lori Slesinski. Following Lori's disappearance, Ennis was the primary suspect, but without direct evidence for Lori's body, he couldn't be charged. Ennis left Auburn shortly after speaking with detectives and eventually settled in Huntsville, Alabama, in 2007. By then, Lori's case had gone cold. In Huntsville, Ennis moved in with Abram Sissons, telling him that he had kitchen rugs given to him by a woman from Auburn who had vanished, but didn't mention her name. Abram didn't suspect anything out of the ordinary about his conversations with Ennis until he discovered Ennis's dark past. At that point, Abram asked Ennis to leave right away. Later, Abram reported that his apartment was completely trashed when he returned. However, police were able to recover the rugs, and one of them tested positive for Ennis's blood. Abram also mentioned that he had seen a Galileo thermometer in Ennis's room before Ennis moved in with him, the same type that was missing from Lori's home. Unfortunately, even with this new information, the police were still unable to connect Ennis to Lori's murder at that time. As their main suspect remained at large, the case went unsolved, leaving Lori's distraught family waiting for answers. Years went by with no updates on the case. Then, in 2016, Mark Whitaker, a special agent with the Alabama State Bureau of Investigation, launched a cold case unit and reopened Lori's case. Alongside his team, including his longtime partner Agent J.W. Barnes, Lori's case was their top priority, and they began re-examining the evidence. They started sending evidence to forensic labs for testing and conducted multiple interviews. After re-examining the evidence, Ennis became the main suspect. Agent Mark suspected Ennis due to his past, but needed more evidence to prove his guilt. In a surprising turn of events, Agent Barnes discovered a crucial piece of evidence while reviewing old files. He found an unopened report from 2006 containing test results from Lori's house. The results revealed Rick Ennis's DNA on Lori's bed sheet and the front door. With all the evidence compiled, investigators built a strong case against Ennis, leading to an indictment in 2018. At that time, Ennis was living in Pilot, Virginia, engaged to Elena Atkinson, and working for a company that built portable living structures called yurts. On August 6, 2018, Rick Ennis was arrested by U.S. Marshals on his 38th birthday, 12 years after Lori Slesinski's disappearance from Auburn. The arrest brought relief to Lori's family but shocked Ennis's fiancée and co-workers. Initially charged with 2 counts of capital murder. The trial started on April 1, 2022. The prosecution presented evidence linking Ennis to the crime, including a cigarette but with his DNA found in Lori's bed sheet. However, the defense suggested that the police might have taken the cigarette from Ennis's home and planted it at the crime scene to frame him. The defense also attempted to discredit Lori Slesinski by implying she was involved in drug dealing, which could explain how Ennis's DNA ended up on the bed sheet. Ennis claimed he had consensual sex with Lori before she disappeared, suggesting they were intimate despite Lori previously rejecting his advances. Nevertheless, his account lacked credibility, especially after two additional witnesses came forward with crucial information. One of his former co-workers in Alabama, Jeremy Brooks, stated that Ennis called him on June 9, 2006, the day before Lori's disappearance. Ennis asked Jeremy to bring him gas and let him keep the gas tank, but Jeremy refused. According to Jeremy, Ennis claimed he had run out of gas and needed help getting some. Later, after Lori's burned car was found, a gas can matching the description of one missing from Ennis's workplace, a bowling alley, was discovered. Another former co-worker, Terry Booth from South Carolina, shared a disturbing experience she had with Ennis years earlier. When asked why he moved from Auburn, Ennis told her he had to dispose of a body. Although Ennis's comment was initially thought to be a joke, his arrest for Lori's murder proved it was not. Despite denying the allegations and maintaining his innocence, Ennis was found guilty after a 2-day jury deliberation. He faced the death penalty, but prosecutors agreed to drop the death penalty after consulting with Lori's mother, Arlene. Arlene later stated that she agreed to a life sentence without parole for Rick Ennis to avoid years of potential appeals and ensure Ennis would never be released. Ennis was sentenced to life without parole on April 14, 2022, and is currently incarcerated at the William E. Donaldson Correctional Facility in Bessemer, Alabama. The outcome was bittersweet for Arlene Slesinski. Tearfully, she acknowledged that it meant she had to accept that Lori would never return home, a hope her heart had held on to. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Christy Wilson. Born on January 10, 1978, in San Jose, California, Christy Lynn Wilson grew up to be a standout athlete and student. After graduating from Gunderson High School, she earned a business degree from California State University, Chico. Christy landed a job at a tech company near Sacramento and spent her free time playing blackjack at a local casino, where she met her boyfriend, Danny Burlando. According to her mother, Deborah Wilson Boyd, and her stepfather, Patrick Boyd, Christy was a bright and accomplished young woman. Christy's family and friends described her relationship with Danny as harmonious, and they thought the couple had a promising future together. However, things took a turn for the worse after they relocated to Sacramento together. Christy was often seen with bruises on her body, but she refused to talk about how she got them. In addition to her troubled personal life, Christy was struggling with her career due to the high-tech crisis. She lost her job and was forced to return to her parents' home in San Jose. Later, she received a job offer in San Francisco and decided to make a fresh start. On October 4, 2005, Christy traveled to Sacramento to collect her remaining belongings. 2 days later, on October 6, Danny Burlando contacted Christy's parents to inform them that she had gone missing. He claimed to have already checked with all local jails and hospitals and reached out to her friends prior to notifying them. The authorities were subsequently alerted about Christy Wilson's disappearance. According to Danny, Christy visited his apartment on October 4th and had dinner with his family that night. Afterwards, she went to the Thunder Valley Casino, which is the last time Danny saw her. It wasn't surprising that Danny went to the family dinner alone because his family didn't like Christy. Similarly, Christy's family didn't like Danny due to suspecting he had abused her, as she sometimes had bruises on her body. Patrick Boyd, Christy's stepfather, loved her like his own daughter and was outraged when he learned about the domestic violence. He wanted to confront Danny, but Christy's mother, Deborah, intervened to stop him. Danny Burlando was 31 years old when Christy disappeared. At the time, he had recently lost his job as a car salesman about a month prior to Christy's disappearance. Neighbors had previously reported to the police that they had heard Christy screaming loudly after a fight between the couple, but they had reconciled shortly after the incident. As a result, Danny was the prime suspect when Christy went missing, and the fact that he waited nearly 48 hours to report her disappearance only increased the detectives' suspicions. They wondered if he had used this time to destroy any evidence. However, Danny cooperated fully with the investigation, allowing the police to examine his phone records, credit card activity, computer, apartment, and car. Despite being a suspect, no evidence of foul play was found implicating him. He also had an alibi, having attended a family dinner before reporting Christy's disappearance to the police. During this time, he had tried calling Christy 78 times, but she didn't answer. Detectives questioned Christy's friends and family, examining her phone and credit card records. There had been no banking activity since October 4th. Christy's parents and the police coordinated a search effort that included dogs, volunteers, and a police helicopter. The family appealed to the public to come forward with any information about Christy's location. Danny, who was trying to find Christy, visited the Thunder Valley Casino, but the staff didn't provide any useful leads. However, Danny did locate Christy's car, which was still parked in the casino's lot. When investigators arrived at the casino, they found Christy's car still parked, but this discovery only led to more questions. Since there was no evidence of a struggle or any other crime, it was unclear whether Christy had left the casino voluntarily, and if so, why she had left her car behind. In an effort to get some answers, detectives requested access to the CCTV footage both inside and outside the casino. Meanwhile, the police conducted another search of Christy and Danny's apartment, but this search yielded nothing. Christy's stepfather, Patrick, a police officer, organized a search of a nearby river, but nothing was found. Investigators turned their attention to Thunder Valley, using Christy's player's card to track her movements at the casino. The card revealed that Christy sat at a blackjack table around 11 p.m., where she interacted with a man who wasn't Danny Burlando. The two appeared to communicate, congratulating each other on wins and comforting each other on losses. During her 6-hour stay, cameras captured the man placing his hand on Christy's shoulder. Christy experienced a roller coaster of emotions that night. Initially, luck was on her side, and she counted cards well. However, as the night wore on, she began to lose. As she consumed more drinks, Christy became increasingly anxious and uncontrollable. Eventually, the casino staff asked her to leave, and when a staff member requested she step outside to calm down, the black-haired man intervened, saying, "Don't worry, I'll take care of this beauty." Shortly after, cameras recorded the man leaving the casino with Christy. During a visit to Thunder Valley, detectives discovered that casino employees had found a mobile phone under a blackjack table which belonged to Christy. This was an unfortunate discovery for the police, as they had hoped to locate Christy by tracing her phone's location. A more thorough examination of the CCTV footage revealed that Christy and her new acquaintance went to the parking lot together. Approximately 4 minutes later, a white car departed the parking lot, while Christy's vehicle remained in place. The investigators suspected that Christy might have left with the unknown man in his car. The key question for the police was whether Christy had done so voluntarily, or if the man had coerced her into the vehicle. Using data from the player's card, detectives identified the man at the blackjack table as 53-year-old Mario Flavio Garcia, a resident of Auburn. Garcia was a family man with a wife, 2 sons, and a successful IT career. The white car seen in the CCTV footage was registered to him, making him the prime suspect in Christy Wilson's disappearance. Although Garcia appeared to be alone in his car when he left the parking lot, and Christy never reached her vehicle after leaving the casino, he stayed in the parking lot for 3 minutes and 41 seconds, suggesting something may have occurred between them during that time. As detectives dug deeper into Garcia's life, they found that he was a respected member of the beloved community and a football mentor. However, he also had a dark side that contradicted his wholesome image. About 25 years ago, he was arrested for abducting his former girlfriend, taking her to a remote location, and forcing her to have sexual relations with him at gunpoint. Following this, the charges were reduced to assault with a deadly weapon as part of a plea bargain, and Garcia received a relatively lenient sentence, striking a deal with the prosecutor's office that resulted in 18 months of probation. Mario Garcia's brush with the law didn't start with his attack on his ex-girlfriend. He was also in a tumultuous relationship with Lynette Smith a few years later. In 1979, Garcia, Lynette, and her mother Violet Davis spent Christmas together. After dinner, the three got into Lynette's car. That night, eyewitnesses reported to the police that a car had plunged into the river near Oakland Airport and sank. Garcia was the only survivor, and he told the police that Lynette was driving when the accident happened. However, detectives couldn't confirm who was behind the wheel. Violet Davis's body was found in the car, but it took a week to recover Lynette's body. The incident was ruled an accident, and no one was charged. When investigators reopened the case, they brought up Christy Wilson's disappearance with Garcia. He claimed he knew nothing about it, stating that they had parted ways after leaving a casino together. However, the CCTV footage couldn't corroborate his story because the camera was facing the other direction at the time. According to Garcia, he went home after saying goodbye to Christy, but his alibi later proved to be a lie. After reviewing the CCTV footage, police discovered that Garcia drove in the opposite direction from his house, contradicting his claim that he went straight home. Garcia told detectives he fell asleep at 8:30 a.m. and woke up to go to work, but his wife refused to cooperate with the investigation, leaving the detectives unable to confirm or deny his alibi. However, cell phone records revealed that Garcia's entire story was a fabrication. The records showed that he didn't go home immediately after leaving the casino. A call he made to his wife at 7:51 a.m. was traced to a cell tower located far from his house, contradicting his initial statement. Garcia also claimed to have arrived at work at 9 a.m., but a colleague reported that he was late, arriving around 10 a.m. Furthermore, investigators learned that the day after Christy Wilson's disappearance, Garcia showed up to work with scratches on his arm and a bruise under one eye. When questioned, he attributed the injuries to a fall from a tree he was pruning, but the investigators were skeptical of his explanation. The police asked a forensic expert to examine Mario Garcia's injuries. The expert, who had a lot of experience, noticed that the scratches on Garcia's face and body didn't match the kind of injuries you'd get from falling out of a tree. There were 4 parallel scratches on his face and 3 parallel scratches on the left side of his chest that caught the expert's attention. The expert knew that when people resist an attacker, a right-handed person will usually leave scratches on the left side of their chest, and Christy Wilson was right-handed. The police suspected Mario Garcia was involved in whatever happened to Christy, so they got a warrant to search his car, home, and computer. Remember, Garcia said he went home after saying goodbye to Christy in the parking lot, but as the forensic investigators searched his car, they started to think that Christy Wilson was probably already dead. The man thoroughly cleaned his car, including the interior, and even removed the mat from the trunk. However, he was unable to eliminate all traces of evidence. Initially, forensic experts detected a small, unremarkable spot on the car seat, which was later confirmed to be blood upon testing. Although the sample was not suitable for DNA analysis, it was a crucial discovery. Furthermore, the police found 2 long hairs and small blood splatters on the back door of the trunk. After a comparison, they determined that the hairs belonged to the missing Christy. Subsequent testing of the blood stains revealed the presence of DNA from both Mario and Christy. This evidence contradicted Mario's alibi that they had parted ways in the parking lot, suggesting a physical altercation between Garcia and Christy instead. After analyzing the history of his internet search queries, detectives discovered that Garcia had been looking for forensic toxicology data and had also visited a website detailing the use of date rape drugs, which can be secretly added to someone's drink. Investigators suspected that Christy might have been a random target and that Garcia could have drugged her drink while they sat together at the same table. Despite the fact that Christy's body had not been found, Mario Garcia was arrested and charged with kidnapping and murder. Throughout the ordeal, Garcia maintained his innocence, despite the mounting evidence against him. The trial began on September 11, 2006, with prosecutors presenting compelling evidence that Garcia had met Christy at the blackjack table, left the casino with her, attacked and killed her, and then hidden her body. At the trial, Garcia questioned the evidence, asking why the DNA on the door, allegedly belonging to Christy Wilson, was the only DNA sample found. He wondered why the DNA of his sons, his wife, and other people who had been in the car was not detected. Garcia argued that it was suspicious that only Christy Wilson's DNA was found, despite his efforts to clean the car, implying that the police must have planted the evidence. Garcia then defiantly stated that he would not ask for mercy, forgiveness, or show remorse, as he claimed to be innocent of Christy Wilson's murder. Despite his protestations, the jury ultimately found Mario Garcia guilty. On January 11, 2007, Mario Garcia was sentenced to 59 years to life in prison, but this was not the end of the story. Christy's family held out hope that after the sentencing, Garcia would finally reveal the location of her body, but he refused to discuss it. As the years went by, Christy's family attempted to move on with their lives, but this was impossible after such a traumatic experience. Mario Garcia's repeated appeals only made things worse, keeping the family in a state of limbo. Although all his appeals were unsuccessful, they prevented Christy's family from finding closure. In 2018, Garcia changed his strategy, offering to reveal the body's location in exchange for early release from prison. Deborah Boyd, Christy's mother, briefly considered negotiating with him, but ultimately rejected the idea, saying, "This would be such a disgrace. He will not use my daughter's body as a bargaining chip." The police turned to Garcia's family for assistance. They were aware that Jean Garcia, Mario's ex-wife, had divorced him following his imprisonment. Over time, she began to suspect her ex-husband's involvement in Christy Wilson's disappearance and death, and eventually lost faith in him. The investigators also reached out to Garcia's sons, Chris and Andy, asking them to recollect any details from the period surrounding Christy's disappearance and the days preceding their father's arrest. The police sought to understand Mario's behavior during that time, wondering if there were any notable changes. Mario's son Chris recalled an important football game he had to attend. As he approached his dad, he noticed Mario working frantically on a tractor, his eyes wild with intensity as he hurriedly attended to tasks around the property. Chris wished his father could come watch him play, but Mario flatly refused, his tone unyielding. This response struck Chris as uncharacteristic of his dad. Investigators asked Chris to accompany them to his childhood home, which his family had lost in 2007. As they walked through the property, Chris pointed out the spot where he remembered seeing his father working on a tractor. The tractor was parked next to a detached garage, situated close to the road and only about 100 yards from Mario Garcia's house. The landscape had been altered to match the surrounding terrain, a feat that Mario had likely accomplished over the course of 4 or 5 days. Back in 2005, law enforcement officers searched Garcia's property using police dogs, but they didn't find anything. 15 years later, investigators decided to take a different approach. In August 2020, they hired a company specializing in ground-penetrating radar technology to scan Garcia's 5-acre property. The technicians thoroughly scanned the property, identifying 8 areas with voids or pockets beneath the surface. The first 2 areas scanned yielded nothing, but the third area, pointed out by the experts, was where Mario Garcia was digging with a tractor. It was there that the police found a skeleton. Further examination left no doubt. The remains were those of Christy Wilson, 15 years after her disappearance. Although the exact cause of her death remained unknown, the experts concluded that she had a broken arm and nose. After 15 years of working on the case, investigators traveled to Arizona to personally deliver the news to Deborah, Christy's mother. This emotional moment brought both sadness and joy to Christy's family, as they finally had the chance to bid a long-overdue farewell to their beloved daughter. At a press conference in Auburn, Placer County Sheriff Devin Bell announced that Christy Wilson's remains had been found, alongside the Wilson family and District Attorney Morgan Geer. Bell emphasized that this discovery was made without any assistance from Mario Garcia, a 67-year-old convicted murderer who had refused to cooperate and provide any information to bring closure to the family. Bell believes Garcia is where he deserves to be, in prison. Deborah Boyd, Christy's mother, expressed her gratitude for this announcement, saying it would bring peace to their family. "This is a peace we've been lacking, and we're thrilled to finally close this tormenting chapter and move forward with gratitude," she stated. Today marks an exceptional display of perseverance in police work that any victim's family could hope for. Mario Garcia passed away on December 24, 2020, due to pneumonia. Christy's family found solace in his death, although it's worth noting that Christy's remains were found on a property Garcia owned back in 2005. Notably, Garcia never admitted guilt. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today, we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Collie Poulton. Collie Poulton was born on September 20th, 1989 in Rochester, New York. As an only child, she received all the love and attention from her parents. However, when Collie turned 3, her parents decided to get divorced. She remained in her mother's custody, but her father maintained a cordial relationship with his ex-wife and regularly visited Collie. Judy, Collie's mother, relocated to an apartment complex situated in a tranquil suburban neighborhood of Rochester. Although her former spouse assisted in caring for their child, Judy experienced some monetary challenges. As Collie reached the age of 4, her mother accepted a part-time position to accumulate sufficient funds for a vacation to Disney World with her daughter during the upcoming summer. Judy's employment involved distributing magazines to subscribers within her local community. On the evening of May 23, 1994, Judy was at home preparing for her work shift. She was inserting leaflets into magazines before setting out to distribute them. At around 6:45 p.m., her daughter Collie asked for permission to go outside for a walk. The weather was pleasant and sunny, and Collie wanted to ride her tricycle. Judy looked out the window and noticed several other children playing in the yard. Considering it safe, she allowed her daughter to go outside for a short while. Judy instructed Collie to remain within the yard area. Excited, Collie rushed out of the house with her tricycle and began riding on the street. Judy had only a few minutes left to finish with the leaflets. After that, she planned to deliver the magazines and take Collie to McDonald's. Once she was done, she grabbed the magazines and took them to the car, planning to call Collie back home. But when Judy stepped outside, her daughter wasn't there. She looked around, called out her name, and there was no response. Judy searched the yard and the surrounding complex grounds, but she couldn't find Collie anywhere. The mother also couldn't hear the distinctive creaking sound that Collie's tricycle wheels made when the child rode it on the street. The outside was eerily quiet. With every moment that passed, Judy's anxiety intensified, and her desperate calls soon drew the attention of those living nearby. She inquired if anyone had spotted her daughter, but only a handful of individuals had noticed her playing outside with some other kids, and they were unaware of her current whereabouts. Once the neighbors discovered that Collie had vanished, They immediately pitched in to help look for her. But despite their efforts, they were unable to locate either the girl or her bike. Most of the complex territory was covered with trees, and around it was a fence separating the houses from the nearby highway. Judy was sure that her daughter couldn't have gone anywhere on her own. Callie knew she was only allowed to ride in their yard, and she had never disobeyed her mother before. She also couldn't have gone far on her small bike, and she would have been found right away. Fearing the worst, Judy decided to call the police. Officers arrived on the scene within minutes and immediately began searching. Soon they were joined by firefighters and canine units. While searching the complex and its surroundings, officers went door to door. The police strongly believed that Callie was still somewhere at the complex. If this was a case of abduction, the most logical suspects were its residents. An outsider would hardly have been able to enter the premises, snatch Callie from the yard, and drive away without anyone noticing. The complex had 300 units, and the residents willingly let the police in, sincerely wanting to help find the girl. In cases where no one was home, the complex manager used spare keys to let the officers inside. Unfortunately, all of this yielded no results. Callie and her bicycle were not found in any apartment. The search continued throughout the night, and around 4 a.m., the case was reclassified as a kidnapping. A special unit took over, and detectives asked Judy if there was anyone in their lives who might wish them harm. They asked about Callie's father, but Judy denied his possible involvement because he had absolutely no reason to kidnap his daughter. The detectives asked if there was anyone among the complex residents who behaved strangely or suspiciously, and Judy shared one observation. She mentioned a 22-year-old man named Mark who had recently moved into the complex with his wife and 1.5-year-old son. According to Judy, Mark's behavior seemed very unusual and even alarming. They had met a few times in the yard and engaged in small conversations once. He complimented Judy's daughter, saying she was very beautiful. Although Judy had heard similar compliments from others before, something about Mark's tone seemed off to her. He then added something even more disturbing, mentioning that he had been observing all the little girls in the apartment complex and found Callie to be the prettiest. These comments raised red flags for Judy, and from that point on, she made efforts to avoid any interaction with Mark, despite still seeing him from time to time in the yard. On one occasion, he asked Judy a very troubling question, wondering if Callie would tell her mother if someone attempted to touch her inappropriately. Judy quickly replied yes and left the yard, finding such inquiries highly inappropriate and suspicious. Prior to these conversations with Mark, Callie liked to play with his son on the playground, but since then, Judy didn't let her daughter near Mark's son, even in her presence. During the conversation with detectives, Judy remembered something else. About a few minutes after she went outside to look for her daughter, she saw Mark in the yard coming out with his son to the playground. She asked him if he had seen Callie, and he said no. Judy also noticed something strange, but at that moment, she didn't pay much attention to it, as her mind was preoccupied with fear for her daughter. She saw that his sneakers were missing shoelaces. The detectives decided to talk to Mark and brought him in for questioning. He denied any involvement in Callie's disappearance and even agreed to take a polygraph test. The operator didn't detect any false answers, so Mark had to be released. Also, Judy herself basically provided him with an alibi, as she saw him on the playground with his son at the exact time when she was looking for her daughter. The police also searched his apartment in the early hours of the investigation, but they didn't find Callie's bicycle or the girl herself. Thus, Mark stopped being considered a suspect, and the detectives continued their investigation with no leads in hand. They began to check Judy for possible involvement in her daughter's disappearance. Judy understood that this was a standard procedure and repeatedly answered all their questions. However, the fact that the police, lacking other suspects, were spending so much time on her only added to her suffering. Information about Callie's disappearance soon appeared in local news, as well as on billboards and flyers throughout the city. The police received numerous calls with tips, the total number of which quickly exceeded 1,000, and investigators quickly checked on each one. Unfortunately, they all led to dead ends, and eventually, the case went cold for months. Despite the lack of progress, Judy never stopped hoping to find her daughter alive. She left her job and dedicated all her time to search. She's been printing and posting flyers, contacting various media outlets, and overall doing everything to keep the case in the public eye. She was also joined by some compassionate people who not only helped distribute flyers, but also managed to raise $100,000, which was offered as a reward for any useful information about Kali's disappearance. Judy got national TV coverage for her daughter's case, including the Oprah Winfrey Show and a crime show. She worked with businesses to keep flyers about Kali's disappearance visible in offices, shops, and on company vehicles. 2 airlines even put the flyers in ticket envelopes. Police looked into new leads, but never got close to solving the case. This went on for 2 years until something unexpected happened on August 9, 1996. A woman called the police and told them about a serious argument she had with her husband. According to her, she was tired of her husband's strange behavior and stated that she wanted to divorce him. In response, he began to persuade her not to do that and tried to evoke her sympathy while telling her how difficult things were for him. He suddenly confessed to his wife that he had killed Kali Poulton, plunging his wife into deep shock. The woman immediately took their child, went to her father's house, and called 911. Finally, she revealed her husband's name to the police. It was Mark Christie, Judy's neighbor. Detectives were surprised by his wife's story, but they immediately encountered a serious problem. Under the state law, any information shared between spouses was protected and could not be used in court. In other words, even if Mark wasn't lying, the police were not allowed to arrest or question him. Also, as we remember, his apartment was searched in the early hours of the investigation, and he had been in the yard with his child shortly after Kali's disappearance, so the police doubted he had the time to kidnap and kill her. Despite this, Detective Crow, who listened to Mark's wife's story, decided to talk to him. He found out that he and his family had moved out of Kali's complex just a few weeks after her disappearance due to some very serious accusations. It turned out Mark had been reported by the parents of 2 girls for standing naked in his doorway in plain sight. No investigation was conducted on this matter because technically he was in his own home, but the fact itself seemed extremely suspicious to the detective. Mark had moved to another city, located 50 miles from Rochester, and Crow headed there. But he was met with an unpleasant surprise. Instead of Mark, his mother opened the door and said that her son wouldn't talk to the police without a lawyer present, whom they had already called. It seemed that Mark had learned about his wife's call to the police, and Detective Crow realized there wasn't much for him to do in this situation. Since a confession made to his spouse couldn't be used in court, Mark's lawyer could easily prohibit the police from speaking to his client, allowing Mark to continue living freely without fear of prosecution. But Crow wasn't ready to give up yet. While he was talking to Mark's mother, he himself eventually came out, and the detective managed to convince him that he just wanted to ask a few questions about Kali's case. Crow suggested they drive to the nearest restaurant and chat over a cup of coffee. To his surprise, Mark agreed, but on the condition that the detective would take him to his lawyer afterward. They stopped at an Italian restaurant nearby, and during the whole time, the detective engaged in casual conversation with Mark, trying not to push things or pressure him. This tactic paid off. While they were waiting for their order, Mark suddenly started talking. He expressed regret for what he had done to Kali, saying that his actions had haunted him for the past 2 years. According to him, he constantly saw Kali in the news and on flyers, and her face haunted him everywhere. Crow continued to proceed cautiously, not wanting to spook Mark with excessive pressure. He had known him since the early days of the investigation, but this wasn't their first conversation. Crow believed that Mark was proud of himself because he had outsmarted the police and avoided punishment. So the detective decided to play on his ego. He told Mark that he had indeed managed to deceive the entire team of investigators working on the case, and this tactic proved effective. Mark replied that he didn't want to sound like he was proud of himself, but the way he got rid of the bicycle was truly ingenious. Mark asked the detective if he wanted to know the details. However, he warned him he would only talk about the bicycle and nothing more. Crow continued to maintain a soft, even friendly tone to avoid scaring Mark and to gather as much information as possible, reassuring him that he didn't have to talk about anything he didn't want to. Then, Mark stated that Kali's tricycle had been in his apartment for 3 days since her disappearance. He knew that when a child is in danger, the police have the authority to search every apartment without a warrant. However, there was a loophole in the law that allowed the police to search only for the missing child and not for any evidence related to the case. This means they could only inspect spaces where a child could potentially hide or fit, leaving other areas of the apartments unsearched. Mark hastily chose to dismantle the bicycle and conceal its components in various areas of the flat that were clearly too small to accommodate a child. He wrapped some parts in garments and stored them in wardrobes, while placing others in compact bags and transferring them to his vehicle. He then progressively disposed of the pieces, transporting them a considerable distance from his residence. Law enforcement officers were positioned at the complex's exit, scrutinizing each vehicle, but as with the apartment, their focus was solely on locating the missing girl, so the diminutive bags did not draw their attention. Listening to this, Detective Crow realized he had a strong chance of obtaining a full confession from Mark. He began to tell him that perhaps Kali's death wasn't his fault, and it was a tragic accident. In response, Mark asked what prison sentence he could face, and Crow replied that most likely it would be around 25 years. Mark said that it would be unfair to make him spend half his life behind bars, away from his wife and son. He added that for the past 2 years, he had been living in his personal hell, which should count for something in sentencing, despite the lack of sense in his words. Detective Crow continued with his tactic, suggesting that Mark should ease his suffering by telling what really happened. Mark replied that he was ready to confess everything, but only after talking to a lawyer. The detective understood that no lawyer would allow their client to confess to a crime, even if they were guilty, if there was no evidence against them. He decided to be honest with Mark about this, adding that if he didn't confess, Kali's parents would never know what happened to their daughter, or whether she suffered before her death. Mark then replied, "She didn't suffer." The detective sensed that he was ready to confess everything, so he said it was time to do the right thing for himself, his family, and God. Upon hearing this, Mark looked at the detective and finally admitted to what he had done. He repeated that the girl didn't suffer and said he had strangled her. He immediately added that he hadn't done anything else to her. According to Mark, that evening, Kali came to his apartment and asked to play with his 1.5-year-old son. He let her in and took her bike to the kitchen. He knew Kali's mother wouldn't allow her to come to this place, so he decided not to attract attention. Kali went upstairs to the second floor of the apartment, to the children's room, where she started playing with the child. About 10 minutes later, Mark heard Judy in the yard calling her daughter's name, and he panicked. He realized that her mother would be furious that he had let the girl into his house without her permission. So Mark went up to the children's room and strangled Kali with his bare hands. Detective Crow doubted Mark's story, suspecting he lured Kali to his apartment to molest her. Hearing Judy, he panicked and strangled Kali with his shoelaces, suggesting premeditation. Mark claimed that after committing the murder, he took Kali's body to the kitchen and left her on the floor. Then he took his son and went outside to create an alibi for himself. He kept hearing Judy call her daughter in the yard, so he deliberately wanted to be seen by her and dispel any suspicions. After the woman saw him in the playground and went to search the complex territory, Mark returned home and placed Kali's body in a laundry basket, covering it with clothes. A few minutes later, he took the basket outside and placed it in the trunk of his car. By that time, there were already many people in the yard helping Judy look for her daughter. According to Mark, there was such chaos that nobody even noticed him. Mark also took his son with him and drove to the company where he worked as a security guard. He parked near the back of the huge building and left the basket with Collie's body by the door. Then, he drove around and entered through the main entrance. Given that Mark had the day off, he lied to his coworkers about forgetting something at work. The story didn't raise any suspicions, so Mark walked through the building and opened the back door from the inside. He took the basket with the victim's body and climbed onto a huge 30,000-gallon tank filled with liquid coolant. He opened the top lid and dropped Collie in first, tying a heavy metal object to her afterwards. He disposed of all the victim's clothes, but specified that he didn't remove the victim's earrings. Once done disposing of the body, he returned home and immediately joined the search for Collie with the other neighbors. Basically, he managed to remove the body from the complex even before the police got involved, and no one noticed anything. At the end of his confession, he stated that killing Collie was a big mistake, and he shouldn't have done it. Having obtained all the necessary information, Crow paid for their food, and Mark left a $2 tip. Then, he willingly went with a detective to the station, where he was arrested on a charge of murder. As soon as Mark's lawyer learned about his confession, he tried to withdraw it, but it didn't work out. Mark provided all the information voluntarily, and Detective Crow didn't break any laws. The police immediately went to Mark's workplace and opened the tank. 2 years later, the victim's body was still inside. Although the degree of decomposition didn't allow experts to determine the cause of death or any other details, they could only confirm her identity, and Judy finally got to bury her daughter. Mark admitted his guilt to the judge and was sentenced to a minimum of 25 years in prison, just as Detective Crow had told him. His lawyer managed to negotiate a deal where his client had the kidnapping charges dropped and only faced punishment for the murder. But Mark's story didn't end there. In 2010, the police reopened an old case from 1988. A 74-year-old woman named Viola Manville was brutally murdered while taking a walk in a suburb of Rochester. Detectives had several suspects, including Mark, who was only 16 at the time, but he had passed a polygraph test during interrogation, showing no signs of deception. Eventually, a man named Frank Sterling was arrested for the crime. At first, he denied his guilt, but after a relentless overnight interrogation, he confessed to the murder. After being in prison, Frank tried to appeal his sentence, claiming that the police coerced his confession and that by the end of the interrogation, he could barely comprehend what was happening. However, all of Frank's attempts to prove his innocence failed until 2010, when the case was reopened and all existing evidence was sent to the lab. Experts found a DNA sample from the suspect, which did not match Frank's, but perfectly matched another inmate from the FBI database, Mark Christie. In 2011, at the age of 39, Mark confessed to Viola's murder and received an additional 28 years in prison. However, he did not disclose the motives for his actions and showed no remorse. As for Frank, he was released from prison after 19 years of wrongful imprisonment. He sued the authorities and received nearly $10 million in 2014, but just 3 years later, he died of a heart attack at the age of 54. Mark continues to serve his sentence in prison, but he may be eligible for parole in a few years. However, there are no guarantees of his release. It is worth noting that if investigators in Viola Manville's case had not fixated on another suspect and coerced him into confessing to a crime he didn't commit, Mark might have been incarcerated earlier and he wouldn't have had the opportunity to kill Callie. Unfortunately, things turned out differently. Hello friends, welcome to Out Channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Caitlin Poirier. On January 12, 2023, CBS News Minnesota broadcasted a 24-second clip regarding the passing of Donald Blum, an elderly man with gray hair. He died on January 10, 2023, at the age of 73 due to natural causes associated with aging. Who exactly was this person who became the subject of the news report? Donald Blum was a well-known figure, known for his violent and criminal activities. He was sentenced to life in prison, and despite his crimes, he met a natural end. Blum's death marks the end of a long tale of violence and wickedness that initiated back in the 1970s. His string of crimes culminated in the brutal killing of Kathy Poirier. Despite his history of violence, Blum managed to escape justice for many years until a chance encounter resulted in his arrest and subsequent punishment. His criminal activities commenced in 1975 when he abducted a young girl, assaulting her and locking her in his car trunk. The girl, however, managed to escape and inform the authorities. Blum was eventually convicted, yet his punishment was considered lenient. By 1978, after gaining his freedom, he committed aggravated assault once more. In 1983, he faced charges of criminal sexual conduct yet again. He also terrorized two young girls in a secluded area with a knife, binding them to a tree, gagging them, and choking one repeatedly before stopping each time, continuing to make threats. The girls were rescued when a passing police patrol noticed their car parked incorrectly and swiftly investigated. Blum escaped into the woods and changed his appearance by dyeing his hair. However, his efforts were in vain, as he was apprehended 2 months later when one of the girls identified him. Blum admitted to committing the crime, but the punishment he received did not succeed in rehabilitating him. In 1992, a psychologist predicted that without close supervision, Blum would return to behaving in an antisocial manner, which was later confirmed by his actions. Despite changing his name, finding employment, and getting married, Blum accumulated 6 felony convictions by May 1999, mostly involving kidnappings and violence. To understand the origin of this cruelty and desire to control others in an average individual like Donald Blum, we must explore his troubled upbringing. Donald Alban Blum was born on February 5, 1949, in Minnesota and held American citizenship. His childhood was marked by abuse from his father that persisted from a young age into his teenage years. Early signs of heavy drinking and behavioral problems emerged during his school years, with school attendance becoming irregular when he reached 10th grade. The trauma from his tumultuous relationship with his father likely contributed to his behavioral issues and alcohol abuse, especially during adolescence. Examining the story from a mentally healthy perspective allows us to trace how the series of events may have led to Donald's actions. On May 26, 1999, Caitlin Poirier disappeared while working alone during the night shift at a convenience store linked to a service station. Surveillance footage showed a large man dressed in jeans, a backwards baseball cap, and a New York Yankees jersey with the number 23, taking Caitlin out of the store around 11:40 p.m. Catherine Harnick, who works at a Subway restaurant near the convenience store where Caitlin went missing, was interviewed by the police. She mentioned seeing a man behaving strangely just before their store closed at around 10 p.m. Later, as she was driving home, she coincidentally saw the same man leaving the convenience store. This series of events highlights how critical moments can eventually lead to actions influenced by deep-rooted trauma and unresolved issues. Harnick noted that the unknown man was driving a black Ford F-150 pickup truck with a cab and white markings on the side. The truck circled the maintenance area several times before heading towards Moose Lake and stopping in the parking lot of a local cafe. She also observed that Kathy's car was still in the parking lot when she left work. Based on her description and partially recovered surveillance camera footage, a rough sketch of the suspected kidnapper was created. The individual was described as having long blonde hair and appearing to be around 25 years old. A composite sketch, based on information from 4 witnesses, was shared on local TV and in newspapers to gather more information. Hundreds of people from across the state joined in the search for Kathy Poirier in the wooded area near the station. Despite efforts with service dogs and helicopters, no trace of her was found. Posters of Kathy were circulated in newspapers and on billboards across the region, turning her disappearance into a high-profile case. The nearby sex offender facility confirmed that all inmates were present, ruling out the possibility of a kidnapping by an escaped offender. Police started searching for the vehicle using its license plate number and identified Donald Blum as a potential suspect. However, the truck in his driveway was white. The official search for Kathy ended on June 6, 1999, without success. However, many volunteers continued their efforts, hoping to find her. Investigators believed that someone might have seen something that could help make a connection and bring her home. They noted that the person who kidnapped Kathy might have made a mistake by taking her from a store with security cameras. Searchers focused on the neighborhood itself because if the perpetrator was familiar enough to return to the area twice at night, then someone might have seen him before. A search headquarters was set up at the Lutheran Church in Moose Lake, where staff members processed leads and volunteers distributed flyers about Kathy. Despite extensive efforts and optimism from many involved in finding her, Kathy was never found. Speculation arose that the kidnapper could be an athlete or a New York Yankees fan, so police sought help from sports figures. After 2 weeks with no results, the police asked Minnesota Twins legend Paul Molitor to make a public service announcement. His appeal caught the attention of Darrell Brown, who worked at the Minnesota Veterans Home. On June 18th, Brown called the hotline to report his co-worker Donald Hutchinson, who had similarities to a composite sketch and had recently changed his appearance. Investigation revealed that Donald Hutchinson was actually Donald Blum. He had a black pickup truck hidden in his garage and owned property near the store where Kathy worked. Further digging showed that Blum had previously been convicted of sex crimes, including kidnapping young girls like Kathy. Investigators quickly obtained a search warrant, and agents from the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension located Blum and his family at a campground 140 miles away from Richfield. They woke him up early in the morning to question him. Blum was taken in for further questioning, where it was discovered that he had bought property in Moose Lake around 2 years ago. Neighbors confirmed his frequent visits before Katie's disappearance, mentioning he had not been seen there since. Blum's supervisor at the Veterans Home claimed to be unaware of Blum's criminal history as he went by the name Hutchinson. The supervisor noted that Blum was reserved and not very sociable. Following his arrest, Donald Blum initially cooperated but later chose not to testify and requested legal representation. Authorities led searches which led to the seizure of various items from Blum's residence, although there was no official statement regarding these items and their relevance to the case. An extensive search was conducted on Blum's 20-acre Moose Lake property, involving over 100 National Guard members and hundreds of volunteers who ventured deep into the woods from his land. Though they had to stop as night fell, they resumed their efforts the following morning. Vigor and Katie's mother expressed optimism about finding her daughter, some believing she might be held against her will. However, the sheriff was less hopeful. On the second day of the search, investigators found bone-like fragments among ashes in a fire pit on Donald Blum's property. These fragments were sent for further testing, confirming their origin as bone fragments. A tooth found in the ashes was sent to odontologists for examination. Dr. Norlander, a certified forensic dentist, performed a thorough examination of the tooth, knowing that DNA from the pulp would likely be destroyed. While examining, she found something that looked like a filling, which confirmed it was a human tooth. This helped her determine if it could have belonged to Katie. Dental fillings are made up of an organic matrix and an inorganic filler. The organic part burns away, but the filler particles remain. Analysts can then identify a specific brand or at least a group of potential brands, since manufacturers use up to 50 different types of fillers, each of which shows up distinctly on dental x-rays. The composition of the filling from Blum's fire pit matched the one used for Katie's teeth. Furthermore, researchers were able to identify it as tooth 18 and deduced that it belonged to a young woman. The likelihood that it was Katie's tooth and not someone else's from the area was very high. One major question remains unanswered. Why was the perpetrator released from prison after kidnapping 7 different girls? If the justice system had functioned properly, Katie might still be alive. Instead, Blum managed to change his name, escape his criminal history, find a job, get married, and assume a new identity, all of which allowed him to continue causing harm. In Katie Poirier's case, Blum was accused of kidnapping and illegal possession of a firearm, a federal offense due to his prior convictions that prohibited him from carrying firearms. He initially declined a plea deal, but later changed his mind, agreeing to testify under certain conditions that allowed him to call his family. On September 8th, Blum made a tearful confession that lasted 2.5 hours. He confessed that on May 26, 1999, he went fishing and then drove back to his home in Richfield later that evening. However, he returned to his home on Moose Lake afterward. On the way, he stopped to buy alcohol and have a drink at a bar. He saw Kathy in the store while she was working. Even though he didn't know her, he grabbed her, forced her into his pickup truck, and took her to his motorhome. Blum explained that he was unsure whether his actions stemmed from guilt, feeling foolish, or another reason, but he eventually strangled and killed her. He strangled her from behind, taking approximately 20 minutes. He denied any other form of assault. After realizing she was deceased, Blum placed her in a fire pit in a fetal position, gathering wood and paper to ignite the fire. Blum's version of events contradicted video footage and evidence found at the burn pit. He claimed Kathy had asked multiple times to be released, although she did not resist until he began choking her on his property. He maintained that he was able to end her life using only his hands. Blum's description of burning the body seemed implausible, as wood and paper alone couldn't generate enough heat to reduce a human body to ashes. When pressed, he admitted that none of it made sense to him. He couldn't explain why he did it. At the end of the interview, Blum contacted 2 local TV stations to confess his actions and requested that his family be left alone by the media. As part of the agreement, confiscated property was returned to his wife Amy Blum, including land on Moose Lake, a residence in Richfield, and the family vehicle. For the Poirier family, the confession was devastating, as they had hoped Kathy was still alive. Blum now asserted that she had been murdered and cremated without any discernible motive apart from an inexplicable nighttime impulse. Shortly after, Blum retracted his confession, attributing it to stress from solitary confinement and medication-induced hallucinations that led him to believe confessing was his only escape from his cell. Consequently, the plea deal was revoked as both sides' legal teams prepared for trial. False confessions manifest in various ways. Sometimes, individuals confess to crimes they didn't commit spontaneously. This can occur in response to high-profile cases. Some people succumb to intense interrogation pressure and confess quickly. Additionally, there's a phenomenon where individuals internalize police accusations and come to believe they were involved in crimes they didn't commit. Blum may have admitted to lying under oath or taken back his statement, leaving the decision to the jury. The trial of Blum commenced in June 2000 and involved an extensive jury selection process lasting 5 weeks, followed by 5 weeks of trial proceedings. More than 50 witnesses, including key individuals, were summoned to testify. The case was presented by Thomas Perler, the assistant prosecuting attorney of Carleton County. Initially, Blum's brother testified that he had given their family a box of old clothing, which included a New York Yankees jersey. This revelation was crucial, as Blum had previously denied owning such a garment. Testimonies from 2 women who were kidnapped by Blum in 1983 were particularly damning. They shared their experiences at his hands, shedding light on his behavior towards them when they were young girls, similar to Kathy. Forensic dentists later confirmed that a particular tooth found matched Kathy based on age, gender, and dental records. Expert witness Dr. Ann Norlander initially had doubts about the tooth's identity, but eventually testified with reasonable medical certainty that it belonged to Kathy. based on specific chemicals in the filling material. Additional proof came from surveillance footage from a different store captured in May, showing Blom around the time of Kathy's abduction. His hair, originally gray with blonde tips, verified by his barber, gave him a more youthful look. A pivotal moment in the trial was when Blom's confession was presented in court, with each juror receiving a transcript for examination. The courtroom was filled with the quiet sobs of Kathy's relatives, indicating the strong case against Blom. On August 7th, the lead defense attorney, Rodney Broden, introduced his first witness, Amy Blom, who claimed that her husband was home on the night of Kathy's disappearance. She mentioned recalling seeing a news broadcast the following day about the girl's vanishing act. Amy brought attention to the fact that Katie's disappearance happened near their country house on Moose Lake, which is 110 miles away from their home. Amy considered Blom a suspect due to his criminal record. However, she later recalled his whereabouts on the night prior. Blom had returned home at 9:30 p.m., and by the morning, Amy found coffee ready and saw his spouse at home while they were in bed. Amy mentioned how she felt bullied by the police officers who threatened to take her children if she did not comply with their questioning. She expressed frustration at being called a liar. Moreover, Amy denied ever receiving a baseball jersey from her son-in-law and claimed to have never seen her husband wearing one. During her testimony, Blom was visibly emotional, wiping his eyes in distress. On August 10th, he took the stand to defend himself under oath, denying accusations of kidnapping Kathy Poirier. He spent over 3 hours on the stand, alternating between speaking and crying. Blom portrayed himself as a man in turmoil, claiming his life was in shambles and he was unwell during that period. While he initially confessed to the crime to investigators, Blom later stated that he recanted the confession. He insisted that on the night of the crime, he was at home with his wife, as she had told him, despite being at Moose Lake for fishing earlier in the day. Blom arrived home at 10 p.m. that evening, before Katie was taken. During cross-examination, he had to acknowledge the lies and inconsistencies in his initial statements to the police at the start of the investigation. His courtroom appearance did not sway opinions in his favor, as many perceived him as trying to evade responsibility by portraying himself as a victim. After the questioning ended, Blom seemed frustrated. He turned to the judge, cursed, and asked if he could make one final statement. When the judge denied his request, the case was handed over to the jury. They deliberated for 10 hours, spending 3 hours replaying taped confessions. Ultimately, the jury found Donald Blom guilty, sentencing him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Blom maintained his innocence, declaring, "I never killed anyone." He was confident that he had a strong case for appeal. Despite his belief, in 2004, the appeals court upheld his conviction in an 81-page ruling. While acknowledging that his trial was not perfect, the court deemed it fair and saw no reason to overturn the verdict or order a new trial. The murder of Caitlin Poirier resulted in the enactment of Katie's Law. This legislation involved the creation of a statewide computerized crime-fighting network and stricter regulations for monitoring predatory sex offenders like Blom. In February 2017, at a high-end hotel in Soho, New York, a crisp $100 bill quietly slid across the check-in counter. The desk clerk was astonished by the generous tip from a young lady named Anna. She announced she planned to stay at the hotel for an entire month. At 26 years old, Anna chose a luxurious room adorned with ceramic art pieces and expansive windows showcasing the vibrant New York streets. The cost of this accommodation was $400 per night. Over the following weeks, Anna frequently approached the front desk for additional services for her room, always leaving generous tips. She appeared well-versed in the city's fashionable locales and was familiar with the proprietors of these establishments. She even knew the names of various bartenders and servers. Anna donned high-end designer wear and enjoyed gourmet meals. Despite her apparent affluence and education, Anna's demeanor struck many as unusually discourteous. She never expressed gratitude, was often brusque with the staff and constantly hurried them along. Regardless of this behavior, she rapidly gained a reputation as a lavish tipper. The hotel staff competed for the opportunity to attend to her room, knowing they'd receive no less than $100 for their efforts. Anna seemed to spend extravagantly, almost eager to part with her money. However, this seemingly affluent and enigmatic persona was far from her true identity. She was actually Anna Vadimovna Sorokina. Born on January 23, 1991 in Domodedovo, a city situated south of Moscow in Russia, her father was a truck driver and her mother ran a modest store. In 2007, at age 16, Anna's family relocated to Germany. Her father began managing a transportation firm, which eventually went insolvent in 2013, 6 years after their move. Subsequently, he ventured into the heating and cooling industry. During this period, Anna's mother dedicated herself to managing their household. Anna attended a Catholic educational institution where her ex-classmates recall her as being reserved and unassuming. She encountered significant difficulties with the German language during her time there. In 2010, Sorokina began her studies at an arts and design college. However, she discontinued her education 3 years later. At the age of 22, she moved to Paris. While in Paris, she interned at a prestigious French publication and adopted a new identity, Anna Delvey. She claimed that Delvey was her mother's maiden name, but this was later revealed to be untrue. In Paris, Anna started attending Fashion Week events and various social gatherings. Her parents provided financial support as best they could. Anna constantly reassured them that investing in her future was a wise decision. In 2016, Anna relocated to New York. She quickly began making appearances at elite social events where she mingled with affluent individuals and gained recognition. Her entry into these exclusive gatherings was facilitated through her close association with Oliver Zahm, the editor-in-chief of the French magazine where Sorokina had interned. At these events, she introduced herself as Anna Delvey, purportedly a wealthy heiress from Germany. Anna claimed she had a fortune of 60 million euros in Swiss bank accounts. The true nature of her father's profession remained uncertain. Some speculated he was a diplomat, others thought he owned an oil company, and a few believed his business involved dealing in antiques. While in New York, Delvey formed a friendship with well-known art collector Michael Souffahon. He shared his ambitions to launch a private art museum with her. When Michael mentioned his plans to attend an art exhibition in Venice, Italy, Del expressed her desire to join him. Michael agreed and covered the expenses for Anna's flight and hotel accommodation under the understanding she would reimburse him later. In Venice, Delvey opted to pay for everything in cash, a choice that struck her wealthy companion as peculiar. Upon their return to New York, Anna didn't show any urgency in settling the debt for the trip. Eventually, the affluent Michael overlooked the unpaid amount of $3,000. In New York, the young woman became friends with Rachel Williams, a former photo editor for a fashion magazine. Rachel characterized Anna as demanding and discourteous towards others. Nevertheless, the two women maintained a close and amicable relationship. Anna began sharing her entrepreneurial vision with her friends. She aspired to purchase a historic building on Park Avenue in Manhattan and transform it into an art venue called the Anna Delvey Foundation. In this building, she envisioned setting up a gallery, retail stores, restaurants, a bar, and a bakery across its 6 floors. Simultaneously, Delvey started employing specialized software to fabricate counterfeit bank statements and other financial documents. These were meant to substantiate her claim of possessing 60 million EUR in Swiss bank accounts. Initially, Delvey secured small loans to sustain her extravagant lifestyle by enlisting the help of various financial advisors. Among them was Joel Cohen, known for his investigative work on the financial machinations of the infamous con artist Jordan Belfort, whose story was depicted in the movie The Wolf of Wall Street. In November 2016, Delvey approached City National Bank to apply for a loan of $22 million. Her rationale? To fund the renovation of a historic building, collaborating with notable designers and restorators. She mentioned that funding was necessary as her personal assets were located outside the United States. Delvey submitted counterfeit documents purporting to show she possessed €60 million. However, the bank's loan processing hit a snag. A bank employee sensed irregularities and requested a statement verifying her foreign assets. Subsequently, the banker received the requested document via email, later identified as another fabrication, from a person named Peter Henney. The bank staff found it suspicious that the email originated from a personal account, but Delvey had an explanation ready. "Peter is our family's financial advisor. He mentioned the bank continued scrutinizing documents, but few months later, they denied the loan because she couldn't verify the origins of her Swiss funds." After being turned down by City National Bank, Anna Delvey redirected her attention to Fortress Investment Group to meet her financial needs. The managing director there felt uncertain about Del's loan request, mostly due to inconsistencies in her paperwork. Anna asserted that she was of German descent, yet her passport indicated that Delvey Sorokina was actually born in Russia, which raised suspicion. The director decided to delve deeper into Anna's claimed assets and showed an interest in meeting her Swiss bankers personally. In response, Delvey swiftly withdrew her loan application to avoid further scrutiny and investigation into her affairs. Though she faced hurdles securing loans from two major financial institutions, Anna nonetheless managed to secure loans totaling $200,000 from various banks by using forged documents. This significant sum allowed her to sustain a luxurious lifestyle for several months, indulging in the opulence she had been portraying. In January 2017, Anna organized a lavish birthday celebration at a trendy restaurant. Friends and acquaintances remember the event as highly successful. However, a few days after the party, the restaurant staff contacted attendees seeking contact details for Anna Delvey because she had left without paying the bill for the extravagant affair. Eventually, she resolved this by settling the outstanding amount in cash. On February 18, 2017, Anna checked into the 11 Howard Hotel, where she quickly befriended the administrator, Neff Davis. She initiated this friendship by giving Neff a $100 tip in exchange for information about the most upscale restaurants in Soho. Neff noticed that other hotel guests generally held an unfavorable view of Anna due to her frequent rude and tactless behavior, her habit of not expressing gratitude, and her tendency to wander around the hotel. In a bathrobe, despite this, the hotel staff were eager to cater to Delvey, motivated by her reputation for leaving substantial tips. As time progressed, Anna and Neff developed a closer bond, with Neff taking on the role of Anna's personal assistant. Instead of a conventional salary, Delvey compensated her by inviting her to dine at posh restaurants, treating her to visits to high-end beauticians, and arranging luxurious massage sessions. On one occasion, Delvey brought Neff to an exclusive party where the renowned actor Macaulay Culkin was present. On another, they visited a private trainer, Casey Duke, who eventually became part of their social circle. During her stay at the upscale hotel, Anna Delvey indulged in various luxury experiences. She frequented high-end beauty salons, where she received eyelash extensions from top specialists, each session costing around $400. Additionally, she shopped for items from luxury brands and regularly dined at expensive restaurants. All these lavish expenditures were charged to her account at the 11 Howard Hotel. 3 weeks into Delvey's stay at the hotel, the management realized that the credit card information she had given at check-in was not valid. The hotel owners demanded that Anna promptly settle a bill of $30,000. By then, Delvey had nearly depleted her funds due to her continuous splurging on pricey food and services. Consequently, her social circle had significantly diminished, leaving her to spend time mainly with her 3 closest friends, Neff, Casey, and Rachel. When queried about her financial situation, Delvey remained tight-lipped. On one occasion, Delvey invited Neff to dine at a restaurant after their meal. The payment attempted with Delvey's bank card was declined. She then offered the waiter a series of 12 different credit card numbers, but none were accepted. This left Neff with no choice but to cover that $83 bill using her own savings. However, just a few days later, Delv reimbursed Neff for the expense, paying back triple the amount in cash. This occurred in April 2017. Utilizing falsified documents, Anna Delvey secured a loan of $70,000. She promptly used $30,000 from this sum to settle her outstanding bill at the 11 Howard Hotel. The following month, after submitting a counterfeit bank transfer confirmation from Deutsche Bank, Delvey arranged for a charter flight on a business jet to Omaha, Nebraska. Her intention was to attend an annual investors meeting, hoping to meet the renowned billionaire Warren Buffett. Also in May 2017, Delvey invited a group of her friends, including journalist Rachel Williams, fitness trainer Casey Duke, and a team of videographers for a trip to Morocco. The purpose of this journey was to film a documentary about establishing her philanthropic organization, the Anna Delvey Foundation. For their accommodation, she reserved a luxurious villa in a 5-star hotel complex costing $7,000 per night. The villa featured 3 bedrooms, a private pool, and a dedicated personal assistant. Early into their stay, Casey Duke suffered from food poisoning and had to urgently return to America for medical care. A few days thereafter, the hotel staff informed Delvey they were unable to process payments using her credit card. Anna blamed the staff for incorrectly entering her card information, resulting in the immediate dismissal of one employee for failing to verify the payment data accurately. In this tight spot, Delvey persuaded Rachel Williams to cover the substantial bill of $62,000, an amount equaling Rachel's yearly income. Moreover, Rachel also bore expenses for the flight to Morocco, various purchases made by Anna, and a private excursion to the Majorelle Garden on her credit cards. Despite these considerable charges accruing on Rachel's account, avoid repetition, Delvey assured Rachel that she would reimburse her soon enough. She promised to reimburse these costs later. However, after their return, Anna only paid back $5,000 to Rachel. This left her friend distressed and forced to borrow money from others to afford her apartment rent in New York. By July 2017, grievances about Anna Delvey had begun to surface, notably from designer Mark Creamer, whom she had contracted a year prior for branding services. Creamer was demanding payment for his work, with his fees totaling $17,000. During this period, Anna was frequently moving between hotels, accruing substantial debts and consistently failing to settle her bills. Eventually, she found herself in a dire financial state and reluctantly sought refuge with her friend Casey. At one point, the two women met in a restaurant to discuss Anna's life and financial predicament. Initially, Anna was evasive in her responses, but soon broke down in tears during the conversation. She claimed that her financial woes would be resolved once she succeeded in acquiring the historic building she had been eyeing. It was at this juncture that Rachel Williams realized she was unlikely to recover the remaining sum owed to her by Delvey. Prompted by this revelation, Rachel composed a letter to the local prosecutor's office. Within an hour of sending the letter, law enforcement officials contacted her and revealed they were already conducting a criminal investigation into Anna Sorokin. On October 3, 2017, while undergoing addiction treatment at a rehabilitation center in Los Angeles, Anna Delvey was apprehended and charged with grand larceny and check fraud. By the spring of 2019, the then 28-year-old Anna Delvey faced trial in a case that extended over several months. She was accountable for debts amounting to at least $275,000 owed to various organizations and individuals. The prosecution argued that Delvey's criminal activities spanned a period of 10 months from November 2016 to August 2017. They claimed that Anna Sorokin's mode of operation involved funding lavish lifestyles among her middle-class friends to avoid raising suspicions about her supposed wealth. In contrast, she leaned on wealthier acquaintances who were less vigilant about their expenditures to cover her own expenses. In her defense, Sakina's attorney asserted that his client genuinely believed in her future financial prospects and her ability to eventually repay her debts. He maintained that the milieu surrounding Anna, marked by arrogance and pretense, with individuals frequently glorifying their lives on social media, significantly influenced her to engage in fraudulent activities. Anna displayed an apparent lack of concern regarding her mounting debts and the potential prison sentence she faced. She approached her trial with a unique flair, transforming it into a public spectacle. For each court appearance, she donned attire from the latest designer collections, having enlisted the services of a stylist previously associated with Courtney Love. The stylist's selections were crafted to present Anna in a serious light while simultaneously garnering sympathy. Throughout the trial, Anna consistently made appearances in high-end designer clothes and expressed dissatisfaction with what she perceived as inadequate media coverage of her case. Despite not viewing herself as a fraudster, Anna Delvey was ultimately convicted. She received a sentence of 4 to 12 years in prison, along with a fine of $24,000. Additionally, she was mandated to compensate the victims with $200,000 in restitution. In a candid interview with journalists, Anna openly admitted that she harbored no regrets about her past actions. She even asserted that given the opportunity to revisit her choices, she would make the same decisions all over again. In 2019, Rachel Williams, one of Anna's acquaintances, published a book titled My Friend Anna. This book delves into Rachel's personal experiences with the swindler and explores the profound impact that their trip to Morocco had on her life. She kept her followers updated about how to communicate with her and provided instructions for sending money via cryptocurrency while in prison. Delve took meticulous care of her health and appearance, ensuring she slept at least 12 hours daily and dedicated 9 hours each week to yoga practice. She proudly claimed physical changes, noting she had slimmed down and grown a few centimeters taller. Without access to a phone, she immersed herself in books. Anna expressed dissatisfaction with the prison food, particularly missing fresh greens and broccoli. Resourcefully, she made her own nut milk, cultivated greens, and frequently experimented with new organic products available in the prison commissary. After serving 4 years in prison, Anna Delvey was released on February 11, 2021. She quickly reverted to her previous extravagant lifestyle by moving into a lavish hotel, courtesy of funds received from Netflix for the rights to adapt her story. Part of this income was used to settle some of Anna's outstanding debts. However, her freedom was short-lived. Just 6 weeks following her conditional release, on March 25, 2021, Anna Delvey was taken into custody by U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement due to an expired visa. The decision to detain her was influenced by the immigration judge's assessment that if released, Delvey would likely revert to fraudulent behaviors. In February 2022, Netflix launched the series Inventing Anna, written by Shonda Rhimes, famous for creating Grey's Anatomy and Scandal. Actress Julia Garner portrayed Anna Delvey in the series. It's reported that Sorokina received $320,000 from Netflix for the rights to her story. Currently, Anna is under house arrest in a New York apartment where she is prohibited from using the internet and rigorously follows this restriction. She regularly contacts her parents by telephone and is permitted meetings on Thursdays. She engages in magazine photo shoots and provides interviews. In January 2023, a photo captured her celebrating her 32nd birthday with flair in her New York dwelling. Sorokina is crafting ambitious plans for the future and aspires to initiate her own reality show, aiming to host notable figures like Madonna and Elon Musk as guests on her program. Fate had other plans. On Monday, August 11, 2008, after Sarah finished her shift at the dental clinic, she met Ryan at her favorite cafe. They had dinner together, engaging in lively conversation, and afterwards walked home, where Sarah began sorting out the groceries she had bought. She then sat down on the couch, and Ryan handed her a glass of water and a pill, as she had complained of a headache during dinner. They spent the rest of the evening watching their favorite TV show, exchanging gentle kisses, and eventually, Sarah headed upstairs to the bedroom. She undressed, neatly folding her clothes, prepared a towel, lit scented candles, and put on her favorite music. Meanwhile, Ryan stayed downstairs, flipping channels on the TV remote, briefly stopping at a soccer game and lying on the couch for about 10 minutes. He called out to Sarah over the soft music, but she didn't respond. Ryan slowly made his way upstairs, entered the bedroom, and turned on the TV. He called out to Sarah again, but was met with silence. Panic started to set in, and he rushed to the bathroom, where he found Sarah lying face down in the tub. Ryan immediately pulled the plug and grabbed the phone to call emergency services. At 10:49 p.m., the service recorded the call, with Ryan frantically yelling that his wife had drowned in the bathtub, likely having fallen asleep. In his panic, Ryan failed to follow the dispatcher's instructions, wasting precious time. Under the dispatcher's careful guidance, Ryan eventually managed to pull Sarah out of the tub and performed CPR on her repeatedly. The ambulance, accompanied by police officers, arrived at the Widmer home just 6 minutes after the call. The police were initially drawn to the scene of the tragedy. Upon inspection, the bathroom appeared clean and dry, with no signs of water or scattered supplies that would indicate a hasty removal of a body from the water. The bathroom was meticulously clean. Sarah lay on the bedroom floor, nude with dry skin, but her wet hair suggested drowning. The bedroom was also tidy, leading law enforcement to suspect murder. Ryan, wearing only his underwear, was thrashing about the bedroom. When medical professionals found no pulse, they began performing cardiopulmonary resuscitation. A pinkish-white discharge from Sarah's nose and mouth confirmed drowning. Medical staff attempted to intubate Sarah twice as she lay on the bedroom floor, but both attempts failed. She was then rushed to an ambulance, where 2 more attempts were made to revive her heart using a defibrillator, again without success. Throughout the ordeal, Ryan remained by his wife's side, visibly distraught and anxious, as described by medical staff. Within 20 minutes of arriving at the hospital, medical staff attempted to revive Sarah, but at 11:41 p.m., an emergency physician pronounced her dead. Ryan, overcome with grief, fell to his knees in the hospital hallway and wept. The sudden tragedy that occurred just 4 months after the wedding sent shockwaves throughout the city, and Ryan became the prime suspect in the murder of his young wife. Ryan's initial statement, given at the hospital, raised doubts about its accuracy. He claimed that only he and his wife were at home, and that nothing out of the ordinary had happened. They had dinner at a cafe, returned home, and watched TV together. Sarah had a headache, and he gave her painkillers and helped her to the bathroom when he found her. However, the emergency call record showed that the victim was lying face down, contradicting Ryan's account. The man was distraught, repeatedly calling out for Sarah. Under pressure from the investigator, Ryan shifted from being a victim to a participant in the investigation, working to uncover what had happened to Sarah that night. He agreed to let investigators search their house. Analysis of the medication Sarah took revealed it was a common painkiller, but it was discovered that Sarah's frequent headaches and migraines had led her to take a course of drugs that altered her hormonal balance, causing uncontrollable sleep. This became the initial theory behind Sarah's death. After searching the house, police found bloodstains on the carpet. When they arrived, the bathtub was dry and there were no wet towels. The tile floor was also dry and clean, leading police to suspect that Sarah had been murdered. No wet items, clothing, or other objects were found in the house that could have been used to soak up water. Ryan's statements during the 911 call and at the hospital were contradictory, which raised suspicions and turned him from a victim into a suspect. An examination of Sarah's body revealed bruises on her forehead, neck, armpit, and upper lip, as well as lacerations on her upper lip. However, there was no clear evidence of a struggle, as her fingernails were not broken or chipped, and there were no marks on her hands, elbows, or knees. Ryan's body also showed no signs of injury or struggle. An investigation by Sheriff Bishop was inconclusive, as all the bathroom supplies were in place, and there were no signs of resistance. It was unclear whether Sarah had taken a bath that evening, or if she had not resisted, and allowed her husband to drown her. Sarah's autopsy, led by Dr. Russell Apt Grove, revealed that the cause of death was drowning, accompanied by multiple muscle hemorrhages in the front of her neck and contusions on her scalp. These injuries, which occurred before her death, raised many questions, but their origin remained unknown. The investigation struggled to make progress with no leads or answers. The toxicology tests found no traces of illicit or alcoholic substances in Sarah's blood. On August 13, 2008, Ryan was arrested on suspicion of aggravated murder of his wife. The decision was based on the discrepancies in the emergency call and the crime scene, as well as the injuries found on Sarah's body. This evidence was sufficient to charge him with her murder by drowning. Despite Ryan and Sarah's seemingly perfect relationship, with friends and neighbors testifying to their deep love for each other, and their public displays of affection, no one could understand what drove them to such a tragic end. In March 2009, the first court hearing took place. Ron Cronenberger, the emergency dispatcher who received the call, testified as a witness. He described Ryan as remaining calm during their conversation, stating that it seemed like Ryan was pretending to perform CPR by blowing into the tube. The prosecution argued that the 911 call, the crime scene, and Sarah's injuries provided sufficient evidence to prove Ryan's guilt. They alleged that Ryan had forcibly drowned Sarah by holding her underwater in a bathtub. The bathtub was a crucial piece of evidence in the case. Upon examination, police found fingerprint streaks, supposedly left by human hands, closer to the middle of the tub. Using a reflected ultraviolet imaging process, fingerprints and smears were detected on the tub. A forearm print was identified, and a hair follicle test revealed that it was left by an adult male, although the exact age of the print could not be determined. However, the bathtub was not the critical evidence needed to prove the struggle between Ryan and Sarah. The prosecution suggested to the jury that a violent altercation likely occurred that night at the Widmer home for unknown reasons, and that the suspect deliberately kept quiet about it. The defense team called in an expert to testify that it is highly unlikely for someone to fall asleep and drown in a bathtub unless they were under the influence of illegal drugs or alcohol. The expert explained that the sensation of water on the face would normally wake a person up or trigger a gag reflex, causing them to cough or choke. Even if the person didn't wake up, the lack of oxygen would eventually rouse them. The pathologist who performed the autopsy testified that if Sarah's body was dry, but her hair was wet, it could indicate that her head was forcibly pushed off the edge of a bathtub, toilet, or sink. This could have happened while her head was facing forward or backward, whether the water was running or the bathtub was full. The prosecution argued that Ryan held Sarah's head underwater until she drowned, making him guilty of the crime. Different if they had received reliable evidence about Sarah's medical condition, which could have contributed to her drowning. The official reason for denying a retrial was the jury's errors in their investigation. Despite another unsuccessful court hearing, Ryan remained incarcerated. The Widmer family received an unwelcome shock when Jennifer Cruz arrived at the prosecutor's office to testify against Ryan, claiming he was guilty. She identified herself as a friend of Ryan's, stating that they had regular communication via phone or email. According to Jennifer, Ryan contacted her on October 26, 2009 at 11:09 p.m., and his voice was highly distressed. He confided in her, saying that he had assaulted Sarah in the living room on the day she died. The trigger for the altercation was Sarah's discovery of Ryan's infidelity, leading to a prolonged argument that started downstairs and continued in the bedroom. Ryan pushed Sarah into the bathroom, leaving her without checking on her well-being. After calming down, he found Sarah floating lifelessly in the full bathtub. In an attempt to cover his tracks, Ryan allegedly wiped the water from the bathroom floor using towels and concocted a story about the accident. However, Ryan's defense team vigorously disputed Jennifer's testimony, pointing out several inconsistencies. The lawyers argued that Jennifer's account was implausible, as no wet towels were found anywhere in the house, including the dryer. Furthermore, there was no evidence of infidelity in Ryan and Sarah's marriage. The family was financially stable, and they never quarreled. Ryan's friends described him as a kind, helpful, and even-tempered person who never displayed anger. Additionally, Ryan stood to gain nothing from Sarah's death, as they did not have a life insurance policy. Before the third trial, Jennifer Cruz's credibility was called into question, and she was prevented from testifying as a witness. This was partly due to evidence of her past infidelities and petty theft convictions. Additionally, a phone call in which Ryan allegedly confessed to her was not corroborated. In January 2011, a new trial was held, prompted by the discovery of fresh evidence. The defense presented a medical opinion suggesting that Sarah's sudden loss of consciousness and subsequent drowning might have been caused by her underlying medical condition. Medical experts testified that Sarah's existing cardiac or neurological defects could have led to her losing consciousness, but the state's medical experts disputed these claims. Sarah's co-workers revealed that she often slept in her car before starting her shift at the dental clinic, and that she frequently suffered from allergies and stomach pains. On the day of her death, Sarah mentioned to her co-worker, Dr. Benjamin Mesmer, that she was experiencing a headache and stomach pain. Later that evening, a friend spoke with Sarah, observing that she looked extremely tired and complained of a headache and neck pain. Sarah's friends were aware of her ability to fall asleep easily in unexpected places, with one even speculating that she might have had narcolepsy. However, Sarah's mother testified that her daughter did not have any sleep disorders and was a healthy child who regularly underwent medical examinations, which showed she was in perfect health. The defense argued that Sarah's death was not caused by forced drowning because she didn't have any injuries to the small bones of her neck or defensive wounds on her arms and legs. Although the defense couldn't explain how Sarah died, an emergency medicine expert testified that every year, approximately 300,000 people die suddenly in the United States, and in about 33% of those cases, autopsy results are normal and show no underlying medical conditions. After deliberating for 12 hours, the jury found Ryan guilty of murder and sentenced him to 15 years in prison. Basing their decision on the fact that Sarah's body was not wet, Ryan's past history, and their belief that he had staged his 911 call. Ryan's family has passionately defended him, and the case, which dates back over 10 years, continues to unite like-minded individuals who hope to clear his name through DNA testing. While genetic material often plays a crucial role in resolving disputed charges and exonerations in cases involving unexplained deaths, what sets this case apart is the unusual request for the victim's DNA, rather than the person convicted. Unfortunately, a Warren County judge has already rejected Ryan Widmer's request to have the victim's DNA tested. Mike Allen, a former Hamilton prosecutor, noted that after listening to all 3 trials, he never found a clear motive, which is unusual in a murder case. However, the prosecutor is not required to prove motive, which makes this case even more peculiar. Ryan Widmer is awaiting a federal court decision on a motion for his release. He has been imprisoned for 14 years, and his first opportunity for release will be in July 2025 unless a federal judge rules in his favor. According to University of Cincinnati law professor Donald Custer, who also works with the Ohio Innocence Project, proving innocence is not enough to be exonerated. There must be evidence of a constitutional error in the judicial process. In 2025, Widmer will be eligible for parole, but his lawyers believe it's unlikely he'll be granted parole because the parole board tends to favor inmates who express remorse, whereas Widmer maintains his innocence. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Sarah Ann Wood. Sarah Ann Wood was born on March 4, 1981 in New York. Raised in a devout family, Her father served as a pastor in a small town in the state's middle. From a young age, Sarah, along with her older sister and brother, attended services at her father's church and Sunday school. Dancing was her passion, poetry brought her joy, and she was an enthusiastic member of her school's cheerleading team. Sarah loved nothing more than riding her bike, often using it to get to her father's church, less than a mile from home, for services, Sunday school, or to lend her father a hand. On August 18, 1993, when Sarah was 12, she rode her bike to church for Sunday school, following her usual routine. With her father staying home, the classes were conducted by other church members. Her parents expected her to return immediately after the classes, but as time passed and she failed to appear, they grew increasingly anxious. After waiting a little longer, they headed to the church, thinking Sarah might have lingered behind with friends, but she was nowhere to be found. The Sunday school teachers reported that she had departed on her bike soon after classes, taking with her a few books, some colorful folders, and a small display board. Her parents' concern escalated because the ride home from church should have taken only a few minutes, and it was unlikely Sarah would have gone elsewhere with all those items. Moreover, she always sought permission before deviating from her routine. Her parents retraced the route to the church, inquiring with neighbors if anyone had seen their daughter, leveraging the small town's familiarity and Sarah's father's church connections. Dozens of people quickly joined the search, and they soon found a witness who had seen Sarah riding towards her house around 2:30 p.m., just a few hundred yards from her home. This sighting only intensified her parents' anxiety, convinced that something had indeed happened to Sarah, prompting them to contact the police. The local police department swiftly launched a search operation, deploying dozens of officers to scour the area. The sheriff also requested assistance from the fire department, and they joined forces to aid in the search. News of Sarah's disappearance spread rapidly throughout the community, prompting dozens of volunteers to join the effort. Within the first few hours, several hundred people were involved in the search. The police concentrated on the route from the church to Sarah's home, meticulously searching the fields and woods on both sides of the road. Their efforts soon yielded a disturbing discovery. Just a few yards into the woods, they found Sarah's bike leaning against a tree. The police centered their focus on that area and quickly uncovered the items Sarah had brought from Sunday school, hidden beneath a nearby bush. These findings led investigators to a grim inference. It was likely that Sarah had been abducted. They theorized that an unknown assailant might have dragged her from the road into the woods, left her belongings behind, and then taken her away in a vehicle. The police department launched an all-out search effort, pouring all its resources into finding Sarah. Meanwhile, her restless relatives took matters into their own hands, printing flyers with details of her disappearance and distributing them not only in their hometown, but also in surrounding cities, with the help of dozens of volunteers. Despite their collective efforts, the first day's search yielded nothing. Police and volunteers scoured the area within a several-mile radius of the road until nightfall, but no new leads emerged. The search resumed the next morning, with even more people joining the effort. The state police also joined the investigation, focusing on identifying a potential suspect. Investigators questioned every resident in town, hoping someone might have spotted a suspicious stranger or vehicle linked to Sarah's disappearance. Sarah's parents set up an improvised headquarters, manned by dozens of volunteers, who printed and distributed flyers, scouring for witnesses or leads that could bring them closer to finding Sarah. As local media picked up the story, news of her disappearance spread nationwide within days. The police received over 1,000 tips, meticulously investigating each one, but repeatedly hit dead ends. Concerned residents helped the parents raise a substantial $150,000 reward for any information about Sarah's whereabouts. But unfortunately, this too yielded nothing. The active phase of the search continued for about a week, before the police concluded they were unlikely to find valuable leads in the area. They shifted their focus to finding a potential suspect, scrutinizing local residents and convicted criminals from neighboring towns, but to no avail. Sarah's disappearance was featured on 2 popular national television shows, triggering a new wave of tips. Her parents made regular appeals to the public through the media, pleading for any information about their daughter's whereabouts, but her fate remained a mystery. This continued for nearly 6 months until a surprising breakthrough occurred. On the morning of January 7, 1994, 12-year-old Rebecca left her home in a small Massachusetts town and set out on her walk to school. As she strolled down a deserted street, she noticed a man walking alongside her. He attempted to speak, but Rebecca couldn't hear him due to her headphones. When she removed them, the man brandished a gun and warned her that if she obeyed his every command, he wouldn't harm her. He grasped her jacket, and they continued walking in the same direction. Rebecca was terrified to scream or attempt to flee, aware that even if she complied, the man might still kill her. As they walked, she quickly devised a plan. Feigning an asthma attack, she struggled to breathe and sat down on the ground. The man released her jacket, instead gripping the edge of her backpack as she continued to act as if she were suffocating. Seizing the moment, Rebecca slipped out of the backpack straps and sprinted away from her kidnapper. A few hundred yards away, she spotted several adults and rushed towards them, exclaiming that someone had just attempted to abduct her. Meanwhile, the kidnapper sped away in his car, taking Rebecca's backpack with him. One of the witnesses took it upon himself to tail the kidnapper in his own vehicle. After a few minutes, the witness pulled over at the nearest gas station and alerted the police. The witness was able to provide a partial license plate number and the car's model, while Rebecca gave a detailed description of the kidnapper's appearance. The police promptly launched a search for the vehicle, scouring databases for matching cars. They also sent out alerts to neighboring towns, and their efforts were rewarded that very evening. A patrol officer driving through a nearby small town spotted a vehicle matching the description. He pulled over and knocked on the door of the house where it was parked. Inside, he found several people, and upon inquiring about the pickup truck, the owner explained that he hadn't driven it in a while due to his loss of sight. He revealed that his neighbor, 43-year-old Louis Lint, frequently borrowed the truck. Louis, a handyman, assisted his blind neighbor with various household tasks in exchange for using the pickup truck. According to Louis, he last drove the truck the previous day and hadn't used it since. Nonetheless, the officer asked him to come to the station for questioning, and Louis complied. Despite his earlier denial, Louis continued to insist that he hadn't used the pickup that day and had no involvement in the attempted abduction. He claimed to be a devout Christian who spent most of his free time at church and would never engage in such an act. While Louis was at the station, the police took his photograph and presented it to Rebecca and other witnesses in a photo lineup alongside pictures of other men. Unanimously, they identified Louis as the kidnapper. Investigators promptly obtained a warrant to search Louis's house and the vehicles, including the pickup truck owned by his neighbor. Their search yielded a disturbing discovery: a small bag containing duct tape, a knife, children's sunglasses, and candy in Louis's van, which was parked near their house. Additionally, the police found a gun and Rebecca's backpack inside the house. Investigators uncovered a shocking discovery: a large, secret room dug out beneath the house, still under construction. With this substantial evidence, the police arrested Louis for the attempted abduction. Initially, he maintained his innocence, but soon decided to confess to everything. He admitted to traveling to Rebecca's town in search of a victim, bringing along his kidnapping bag that he always kept in his car. Louis then explained the purpose of the secret room he was digging under his house, and his story left even the police stunned. He revealed that he planned to convert it into a fully equipped bunker where he intended to hold kidnapped victims captive. Lewis confessed to aiming to abduct 11 girls between the ages of 12 and 17 to satisfy his horrific fantasies. He added that until the room was completed, he didn't plan to keep his victims there for long, intending to kill them within a few days. In Lewis's house, the police also found a list of several names. Upon identifying these individuals, they realized they were all children living in close proximity to Lewis's home. Following his confession, Lewis was placed in jail awaiting trial for attempted abduction. Investigators continued to visit him to gather additional information, and during one of these visits, he unexpectedly confessed to another crime. Lewis revealed that 4 years prior, in October 1990, he was working as a janitor at a movie theater in the same town where he later attempted to kidnap Rebecca. On the evening of October 22nd, he left work and spotted 12-year-old James Bernardo riding his bike near the parking lot. Lewis instantly decided to abduct him, intending to assault him. Lewis offered James $5 to help set up chairs in the movie theater, and the boy agreed. Lewis led him to the empty theater where he bound him. He then drove his van closer to the entrance, dragged the boy and his bike inside, and took him to his home. He left the boy there and drove to a nearby lake to dispose of the bike by throwing it into the water. Lewis returned home and attempted to assault the boy, but was unsuccessful. Frustrated, he decided to dispose of the victim. He dragged him into his van and drove to a neighboring state, where he murdered the boy and left the body in the forest. A hunter soon discovered the body and reported it to the police. However, despite their efforts, detectives were unable to identify the culprit over the course of several years. Now, upon comparing Lewis's statement with the case materials, investigators discovered that he had provided an astonishing number of facts and details about the crime that perfectly mirrored reality. Following Lewis's confession, news of his case spread like wildfire throughout the country. Within just a few days, police realized they were dealing with a man who not only had attempted to abduct a girl and was building a secret bunker for other victims, but had also confessed to a murder that no one had suspected him of. New York investigators searching for Sarah Wood soon caught wind of Lewis's case. They delved into the details of Rebecca's attempted abduction and requested more information about Lewis himself. Interestingly, profilers had previously created a profile of Sarah's potential abductor, and Lewis seemed to fit it remarkably well. The investigators decided to pay him a visit and headed to the prison. During the interrogation, he revealed that frequent visits to the neighboring state were motivated by close family ties. Lewis also admitted that he would often drive through small towns in search of victims, and on August 18, 1993, he spotted Sarah walking along the road with her bike. According to his statement, he pulled up beside her, got out of the car, and forced her into the van at gunpoint. He then tied her up, dragged her belongings and bike into the nearby woods to conceal them, and drove her hundreds of miles to the mountains. In a remote area by a large lake, he assaulted and killed her, eventually burying her body in a hole. The police launched an extensive search effort around the lake, mobilizing hundreds of volunteers, park rangers, and the military. However, the vast size of the lake posed a significant challenge, making it nearly impossible to cover the entire area, even with such a large search team. Furthermore, with months having passed since the burial, the location could have become overgrown with vegetation. After weeks of searching, they were unable to find either the body or any evidence. Detailed testimony with precise details of the abduction was sufficient to charge Lewis with the murders of both Sarah and 12-year-old James. In January 1995, Lewis was sentenced to 17 to 20 years in prison for the attempted abduction of Rebecca. The following June, the trial for James's murder began, and Lewis pleaded guilty before the judge. He confided in his lawyer that he wanted to confess to Sarah's murder immediately, but when he entered the courtroom and saw her parents, he abruptly changed his mind. However, just 9 days later, when he was brought into an empty courtroom, he finally admitted his guilt. Despite this, he persisted in refusing to disclose the burial site, ignoring the desperate pleas from Sarah's parents. The prosecution offered Lewis a deal in exchange for information about Sarah's whereabouts. In return, they promised to serve his sentence in a state prison instead of a federal prison, as Lewis had requested. He agreed and began collaborating with investigators. Lewis identified a specific area near the lake and even sketched a rough map. Although the police wanted to take him along on the search, his lawyer cautioned against it. Undeterred, the police organized extensive searches in this area, braving the snow and freezing temperatures, with the help of hundreds of volunteers and heavy equipment. Despite their efforts, they were still unable to find Sarah. Several months later, with autumn's arrival, the police launched another attempt, but it ultimately proved unsuccessful. Throughout this period, detectives endeavored to extract more specific information from Lewis, but he persistently refused to divulge the exact location or assist the police in their search. Eventually, the prosecution opted to revoke the deal, and on April 11, 1997, Lewis was sentenced to 25 years in prison, the maximum sentence the judge could impose without the discovery of the body. The judge added that if such evidence were available, he would have certainly handed down a death sentence. During the trial, Lewis's lawyer attempted to mitigate the punishment in all three cases without disputing his client's guilt. He argued that Lewis suffered from an unidentified mental disorder, citing claims of hearing voices in his head and alleged protection by aliens. However, experts found no evidence of any mental disease and concluded that Lewis was likely feigning these symptoms to avoid severe punishment. After the verdict, detectives persisted in visiting Lewis in prison, hoping to coax him into revealing Sarah's burial site. His behavior was erratic, and he provided contradictory information, naming different locations. On one occasion, he claimed he wasn't ready to disclose the location because he had buried Sarah alongside another victim, and he didn't want anyone to uncover the identity of this other person. Despite the emotional pleas of Sarah's parents, who also visited Lewis in prison, he remained resolute in his silence. The detectives were also exploring Lewis's potential involvement in other unsolved cases. Having confessed to the abductions of Sarah and James, the police had little doubt that he had additional victims. Almost immediately after his arrest, they uncovered another attempted abduction he had made several years prior. Lewis had tried to grab a girl off the street, but her father intervened, and they reported the incident to the police, although detectives couldn't identify the perpetrator until Lewis's photo appeared in the news. Lewis was also suspected of being involved in 4 unsolved disappearances between 1985 and 1992, and investigators concluded that he had the capability to commit these crimes, but no evidence was found, and Lewis refused to confess. Despite this, his story didn't end there. Detectives continued to visit him after his sentencing, hoping he would reveal Sarah's whereabouts or confess to other crimes. However, it wasn't until 2013 that Lewis suddenly had a change of heart and confessed to another murder. He admitted to being responsible for one of the crimes he was suspected of. According to Lewis, on November 6, 1992, he abducted a 16-year-old teenager with developmental disabilities who was riding a bike to his grandmother's house. He claimed to have forced the boy into his van, then killed him and dumped his body in a lake. Investigators confirmed his involvement based on his detailed description of the events, although official charges in the case have yet to be filed against him to this day. Currently, Lewis is 73 years old and remains incarcerated for 2 murders and an attempted abduction. Sarah's parents hold on to the hope that they will eventually persuade him to reveal the location of her burial site, or that he will divulge this secret before his death. In memory of Sarah, her relatives also organize an annual bike ride. Initially attended by just a few people, the event has grown steadily, with several thousand participants now regularly taking part. This event also helps raise significant funds to support efforts to locate missing children. The police are determined to find Sarah's burial site and are not giving up, even if Lewis is not willing to help them. They will keep searching the areas he has pointed out until they locate her body. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Lorena Bobbitt. John Wayne Bobbitt and Lorena Bobbitt were a former American couple whose shocking and amazing story captivated the world, exemplifying the extremes to which humans can be driven. The couple married on June 18, 1989, when John Wayne Bobbitt wed Lorena Gallo. Born in New York, John was raised in Niagara Falls. Unfortunately, his father was absent, and at the age of 3, he was taken away from his mother, a drug addict. He had 2 brothers, and together they went to live with their aunt and uncle. According to John, he grew up in a large religious family where his aunt and uncle raised them to be devout. Every Sunday, the family attended church, and John eventually joined the Marine Corps, following in the footsteps of many of his friends. Lorena, on the other hand, was born in Ecuador in 1969, but raised in Venezuela. As she recounts in her Amazon documentary, she began migrating at an early age. Watching American television as a child had instilled in her the American dream. Her dream came true when she moved to America on a student visa. She enrolled at Northern Virginia Community College. John and Lorena met at a Marine Corps officers' ball in 1988, while John was still serving in the Marine Corps. They were drawn to each other, and their chemistry was undeniable. John described Lorena as shy and not speaking much English, but their chemistry was enough to spark a connection. They started dating and got married just 9 months later. The couple's engagement story had different versions. In a 2020 interview, John said Lorena proposed to him in front of her mother, while Lorena claimed John proposed to her. They had a small wedding, officiated by a justice of peace. According to John, their quick marriage wasn't due to romantic feelings, but because Lorena's student visa was about to expire and she wanted to stay in America, a lifelong dream of hers that he didn't want to deny. Their stories differed in other areas too. Lorena said the abuse started immediately after the wedding. John, however, maintained that he never hurt, raped, or forcefully touched Lorena. Whenever asked, he stuck to his story, making it hard to determine what was happening in the relationship. John said that at times, when Lorena started fighting him, he would restrain her. Throughout, he denied the assault allegations made by Lorena and maintained his innocence. 1 month after their wedding, Lorena shared a different account of her husband John's assault. The incident occurred when the couple was in a car and John started driving recklessly. Fearing for her life, Lorena asked him to stop, grabbing the steering wheel with her hands to try to straighten their route. At that moment, according to the allegations against him, John punched her for the first time. On June 22, 1993, John suggested getting a divorce to Lorena, which upset her because she was still afraid of him. Seeking help, she went to the police to obtain a protective order against John. However, the process took about 3 hours, and Lorena didn't want to wait that long, so she left before completing it. That evening, John went out drinking with his friend who was staying with him. When he returned home, he raped Lorena before falling asleep. The next morning, John claimed he had no memory of what had happened and didn't recall having sex with Lorena. He vaguely remembered some physical contact, but only as far as petting, and that was it. On June 23, 1993, Lorena returned home from work, as she normally did. However, that night would turn out to be anything but ordinary. Her husband, John, came home and subjected her to a brutal rape, an act that seemed to be a recurring pattern of behavior rather than an isolated incident. Following the assault, Lorena went to the kitchen to get a cup of water, her eyes falling upon the various utensils that lay scattered on the counter. Among them was an 8-inch Jinsu carving knife, which caught her attention. She picked it up, feeling an overwhelming urge to break free from the cycle of pain and torment her husband had inflicted upon her. With the knife in hand, Lorena walked into the bedroom, where she found John lying in bed. In a bold and desperate act, she pulled back the sheets and severed his penis. Lorena left the apartment and drove away with her husband John's severed penis in one hand. She threw the penis out of the window into a roadside field on Maplewood Drive. Lost and unsure of what to do, she drove around before finally stopping and calling 911 to report the incident, providing directions to where the authorities could find the missing body part. The police responded quickly and conducted an extensive search, eventually finding John's penis. They cleaned it with antiseptic and stored it in an icebox. Paramedics then took John to the hospital, where surgeons reattached the penis in a 10-hour surgical operation. The incident occurred in the early hours of 1993, around 4 a.m. By nightfall, Lorena had been arrested and charged with malicious wounding, facing up to 20 years in prison if found guilty. When Lorena Bobbitt was arrested, she told the police that her husband always climaxed during sex without waiting for her to do so, and that he was selfish. This conversation with Detective Peter Wentz was recorded on tape. The recording transcript was later read in court by Mary Grace O'Brien, the Assistant Commonwealth Attorney of Prince William County, who was prosecuting Lorena. The trial revealed many details about the couple's troubled relationship, which was marked by volatility and unhappiness for Lorena. The Bobbitts' testimony revealed the events that led to the incident. Lorena accused John of sexually, physically, and emotionally abusing her. She also claimed that he had cheated on her and forced her to have an abortion. An expert witness testified that John's threat that he would find her, whether they were divorced or separated, and have sex with her whenever he wanted, essentially imprisoned Lorena. Defense lawyer Blair D. Howard argued that Lorena had acted in self-defense, driven by temporary insanity. According to Howard, John's behavior and relentless harassment pushed Lorena to the edge. He pointed out that Lorena had been struggling with clinical depression and post-traumatic stress disorder. The defense claimed that John's prolonged abuse of his wife led to the incident. However, John, denying all allegations of abuse and harassment, was questioned by Howard, who exposed inconsistencies in his statements, contradicting known facts. As a result, John undermined the prosecutor's case. Lorena's testimony revealed a history of multiple rapes and physical abuse prior to the incident in question. She disclosed that the couple's finances were precarious, with John stealing her earnings and spending the proceeds. Other witnesses corroborated Lorena's claims, testifying that they had seen her with cuts and bruises on multiple occasions. John's friends also came forward, stating that John had confessed to them about controlling and dominating Lorena, including forcing her to have sex. Both the prosecution and defense attorneys acknowledged that John had a history of abusing his wife, with the repeated acts escalating over time and culminating in the assault. Expert witnesses from both sides agreed that Lorena had been subjected to constant abuse, living in fear of John by 1993. Before Lorena's trial, John was tried from November 8th to 10th, 1993. On November 11th, 1993, a jury comprising 9 women and 3 men acquitted him of marital assault. John Bobbitt provided varying accounts of the events that took place between midnight on June 22, 1993, and the early morning of June 23, 1993. In one version, he claimed they did not have sex because he was too tired, despite Lorena's initiation. In another, he stated they did have sex, but he slept through the entire act, and it was consensual, not rape. After 7 hours of deliberation, the jury deemed Lorena the most credible witness. She was found not guilty by reason of temporary insanity on January 24, 1994. Lorena was then admitted to a psychiatric ward at the Central State Hospital in Petersburg for a 45-day evaluation period. On March 1, 1994, she was released after being deemed no threat to herself or others. In 1995, John and Lorena Bobbitt's divorce was finalized. To fully understand what happened between them, it's essential to consider the events leading up to the incident. Focusing solely on the outcome might give a biased account, portraying John as the sole victim. The sensationalized coverage of John Bobbitt's severed penis overshadowed the underlying issues. Moreover, some feminists criticized Lorena's actions, fearing they might have far-reaching consequences. However, this would be an incomplete narrative. John was discharged from the Marines in 1991, leaving him without a steady income. This significant loss affected the family's stability, and John struggled to find or keep a job. As a result, Lorena became the primary breadwinner. At the time, she worked as a nanny and a manicurist at a beauty salon owned by Jenna Basti. Lorena developed a close relationship with Basti, but in October 1991, she began embezzling money from her, stealing around $7,000. When Basti discovered the theft, she demanded that Lorena repay the stolen amount with interest. Although Lorena was allowed to keep her job at the salon, she continued stealing elsewhere, including taking a few dresses from Nordstrom. She was subsequently sentenced to community service. In 1994, Lorena had an abortion, but the couple gave different accounts of the events leading up to it. Lorena claimed she was eager to start a family, but John was less enthusiastic, allegedly saying he couldn't care for a baby and suggesting she leave him if she decided to keep it. Fearing she'd have to raise the child alone, Lorena chose to have an abortion and blamed John for her decision. However, John's version of events differed, stating that they both agreed the time wasn't right for a baby and made the decision to abort together. After the incident, John faced financial struggles. He attempted to start a band, but it didn't work out. In 1994, he appeared in an adult film to prove his penis was functional, despite still healing. Before the movie premiered, John's new girlfriend, Christina Elliott, brought charges against him. He was found guilty of misdemeanor and domestic battery charges and served 12 days of a 15-day sentence. Following his divorce from Lorena in 1995, John appeared in another adult film in 1996. It's puzzling why he felt the need to showcase his penis on screen again. However, he had a reasoning that made sense to him, aside from the financial gain. In 2002, John Bobbitt was charged with battering his third wife, Joanna Farrell. However, he was found not guilty and acquitted of the charges. After the trial, Lorena Bobbitt, now preferring to use her maiden name, Gallo, deliberately kept a low profile. In October 1996, she visited Ecuador, her birthplace, where she had an official dinner with the then president, Abdallah Bucar. The two also became the godparents of a child. Their unusual encounters sparked controversy in the media, with many criticizing the president for dining with Lorena. In 1997, Lorena made headlines again when she was charged with assaulting her mother, Elia Gallo. According to reports, she punched her mother while they were watching television. Lorena was eventually acquitted of the charge, and her mother chose to remain with her. Lorena Gallo later enrolled at the community college, where she met Dave Bellinger. The two began a romantic relationship in the late 1990s and have remained together ever since, although they have decided not to get married. They have a daughter named Olivier together. It is speculated that Lorena's decision not to marry again stems from her fear of marriage, given the failure of her first marriage. In 2007, Lorena Gallo started a foundation aimed at helping women who were in abusive relationships. Her foundation was called the Lorena's Red Wagon Foundation, a non-profit organization that helps survivors of domestic abuse. Lorena and JN were never seen together in public, at least not until 2009, when they made their first and only joint television appearance. All through their trial, before, during, and after, the couple took interviews but separately, never together. That changed in 2009 when The Insider brought them together in the interview. Lorena Bobbitt told John that he had driven her to the brink of madness and that no woman should have to endure what she went through. In 2019, an Amazon docuseries titled Lorena sparked renewed discussion about the 1990s incident in which Lorena accused her husband of domestic abuse and marital rape. At the time, the Bobbits were a hot topic of conversation and a popular punchline for comedians. However, the public's reaction would likely be very different today. The Bobbitt case unfolded during a time when patriarchy dominated society and marital rape was only beginning to be criminalized across the 50 U.S. states. Lorena, inspired by her own experience, lamented that the sensationalized media coverage overshadowed the underlying issue of domestic violence and abuse. While John's genitals drew widespread attention, the root cause of the incident was largely ignored. The term bobty became ubiquitous, appearing on t-shirts and in commercials. In retrospect, Lorena believes that her story might have played out differently, with the media and public giving more attention to her experiences had it occurred today. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Crystal Rogers. Crystal Rogers, a dedicated 35-year-old mother from Bardstown, Kentucky, lived 45 miles southeast of Louisville. She shared custody of her 4 children with her ex-husband Keith, despite their separation. The two maintained an amicable relationship for the sake of their children. At the time, her youngest son, just 2 years old, was with her current boyfriend, Brooks Hall, because Crystal was a reliable and responsible parent. On July 5, 2015, Crystal's mother, Sherry Ballard, began to worry when her daughter failed to answer her phone. It was unusual for Crystal not to respond to her mother's calls, and Sherry's concern grew by the hour. As the hours passed, Sherry's worry intensified, especially since it had been 24 hours since they last spoke. Crystal's absence was out of character, and Sherry's maternal instincts screamed that something was wrong. Sherry couldn't shake the feeling that her daughter was in trouble. Sherry tried to contact Crystal multiple times throughout the day, but she got no response. She then decided to reach out to Crystal's friends and family, hoping someone might know her whereabouts. Unfortunately, no one had seen or spoken to her recently. Around the same time, Brooke, Crystal's younger sister, contacted Sherry to inform her that she too had been unable to reach Crystal. Brooke shared with Sherry that she had spoken with Brooks, Crystal's boyfriend. According to Brooks, the last time he saw Crystal was on Friday when she was playing games on her phone before he went to bed. When Brooks woke up the next morning, Crystal was gone. He thought she might have gone to visit her cousin's house to celebrate the 4th of July. As Sherry's concern grew, she struggled to get in touch with her daughter. She reported Crystal missing to the police department. While she was there, her son Casey received a phone call from a friend who had seen Crystal's car parked on the side of the road. This discovery worried Casey and his father, Tommy Ballard, as they knew Crystal wouldn't have abandoned her vehicle voluntarily. Casey and Tommy felt a sense of dread when they received the call. Upon arriving at the location, they saw Crystal's car with a flat tire. However, this only made them more convinced that something was seriously wrong. If Crystal had car trouble, she would have contacted one of them for help. It was unthinkable that she would try to fix it alone. When they examined the car further, they found Crystal's keys, phone, and purse on the passenger seat. These items reinforced their suspicion that something was amiss. Crystal never went anywhere without her belongings, and their presence in the car increased their fears for her safety. After Crystal's father and brother discovered her car on the Bluegrass Parkway, they immediately contacted the Nelson County Sheriff's Department. Investigators responded to the scene, inspecting Crystal's vehicle. Although they found no signs of a struggle, one detail caught their attention. The driver's seat was positioned in a way that seemed inconsistent with someone of Crystal's height, implying that someone else might have driven her car. The authorities continued their investigation, seeking help from potential witnesses who may have seen something on the parkway. However, no one provided any useful information. The police then turned to the media, hoping to generate leads from the public. They released Crystal's photo, appealing to the public for help in finding her. Unfortunately, no significant leads came forward. Tommy, Crystal's father, assembled search teams to find her, but the hot and humid weather hindered their efforts. Despite many people showing up to help, her boyfriend Brooks was conspicuously absent. The police became suspicious of Brooks's apparent indifference to Crystal's disappearance, especially since she was the mother of his child. When questioned, Brooks claimed that Crystal and their son had visited his family's farm the previous night, returning home around midnight. He stated that he went to bed while Crystal stayed up, engrossed in her phone, playing games. Brooks claimed that when he woke up at 7 a.m., his son was already in bed with him, but Crystal was missing. Initially, he speculated that Crystal might have gone out with her cousin, but those close to Crystal disputed this, as she would never leave her son behind. Crystal was extremely devoted to her 2-year-old. Crystal's sister, Brooke, believed that Crystal was planning to leave Brooks, citing his lies and lack of emotional attachment to her. Crystal had confided in her mother, Sher, about her desire to leave Brooks, but admitted it wouldn't be easy due to his controlling nature. Casey, Crystal's brother, had recently noticed tension between Brooks and Crystal and had witnessed several heated arguments. The police asked Brooks to take a polygraph test at the police station, but the results were inconclusive. Following the test, Brooks had a formal interview with the detectives. They had gathered footage that corroborated parts of his story, including a video showing his truck entering his family's farm and leaving the property around midnight. However, due to the tinted windows, it was impossible to identify who was inside the truck at the time. According to Brooks, while at the farm, he did some chores, lit a fire to burn building materials, and waited for the fire to die out before driving home. During the interview, the police questioned Brooks about a 13-second phone call he had with Steve Lawson, a business associate, on his way back from the farm. To clarify, Brooks suggested that Steve Lawson explain the conversation to the police. Steve Lawson said he had called Brooks to get the contact details for a rental property. However, the police found this explanation suspicious, as it seemed rehearsed. Steve Lawson added that Brooks told him he had to wait until he got home because Crystal, who normally handled such matters, was not available. The police were puzzled, wondering why Brooks, who was with Crystal at the time of the call, couldn't just hand her the phone and discuss the matter then and there. During Brooks's interview, his brother Nick, a police officer in Bardstown, called him. Nick urgently told Brooks to leave the interrogation room at once. The police didn't believe Crystal had simply run away and abandoned her car on the side of the Bluegrass Parkway. Instead, they thought something must have happened to her while she was at the Brooks HW family farm. As the investigation into Crystal's disappearance progressed, several people contacted the police, claiming to have seen Brooks's truck and Nick's police car at the Howe family farm. These reports led detectives to suspect that the brothers were at the farm, getting rid of evidence related to Crystal's disappearance. The police decided to bring Nick in for questioning to gather more information. They confronted him about being seen at his family's farm on July 8th and asked him to explain his presence. However, Nick claimed to have no knowledge of the incident and denied being there that night. Despite his denial, the police continued questioning him, asking directly if he and his brother had destroyed or hidden evidence related to Crystal's disappearance. Nick vehemently denied any wrongdoing and insisted his brother was incapable of harming someone. He also stated that, as a police officer, it was unthinkable for him to assist Brooks in covering up a crime. After the interview, Nick agreed to take a polygraph test at the police's request. The test results showed that he failed to answer 2 questions truthfully. Do you know where the crystal is right now? And are you hiding any information about what happened to the crystal? Despite this, Nick continued to insist that he was telling the truth. On October 15th, the police identified Crystal's boyfriend, Brooks, as their main suspect in her disappearance. On the same day, Brooks's brother Nick was fired from his job as a police officer at the Bardstown Police Department due to obstruction of the investigation. Although the police were confident they knew who was responsible for Crystal's disappearance and her likely death, they lacked sufficient evidence to make an arrest. The police were hesitant to take the suspect to court without sufficient evidence, as they would be unable to retry them for Crystal's murder due to double jeopardy laws. FBI agents and law enforcement agencies from across Kentucky teamed up with Crystal's friends, family, volunteers, and missing persons organizations to search the Howell family farm, a 240-acre property, extensively. The daily searches, which left Crystal's loved ones terrified and clinging to hope, were conducted in the hopes of finding her alive and well. During the investigation, a thorough search of a fire's ashes was conducted, but no human remains were found. However, clothing remnants were discovered in the ashes, although investigators were unable to link them to Crystal's disappearance. Multiple search warrants were served on the Howell family farm, targeting cars and residences, but these searches did not yield any significant leads or evidence related to Crystal's case. A $100,000 reward was offered for information about Crystal's disappearance, but no one came forward. Crystal's father, Tommy Ballard, pursued every lead in his daughter's disappearance, driven by his determination to find her. Tommy was especially affected by Crystal's disappearance because, in January 1979, his pregnant sister was brutally murdered by her husband and his friend. They shot and beat her, set her remains on fire, and scattered them on a farm. The perpetrators were eventually caught, found guilty, and sentenced to life in prison years later. Tommy searched everywhere for Crystal, refusing to give up. He went door to door, spoke to locals, and hired specialists with dogs and a PI to help. He kept a daily log of leads and clues, sharing findings with police and seeking their input. Tommy Ballard took his 11-year-old grandson on a morning hunting trip in November 2016. As they left, Tommy's wife Sherry felt uneasy, praying for their safety. Minutes later, she received a panicked call from her grandson. "Papa has been shot." Sherry rushed to get dressed, reassuring him she'd call 911. When Sherry arrived at the scene, she was overcome with grief. She rushed over to Tommy, shaking him frantically. But as she did, she saw that blood was pouring out of his nose. The officers and witnesses who were present quickly pulled her away so that the medics could work on Tommy. However, it was already too late. Sherry knew her husband was gone. Tommy Ballard was pronounced dead at the scene. Initially, the police said Tommy's death was due to a hunting accident. However, Sherry was outraged when she heard this explanation. She was adamant that it was not a hunting accident, but a deliberate murder. "This is my husband, and I know you're aware of it. This is a murder," she asserted emphatically. After investigating Tommy's death, investigators concluded that he did not take his own life because his weapon had not been fired. They also cleared his 11-year-old grandson of any involvement in the shooting. The Kentucky State Police later announced that they were treating Tommy's death as a murder. The Ballard family believes that Tommy was killed because he was getting close to uncovering the truth about his daughter Crystal's disappearance. They think the people responsible for Crystal's disappearance wanted Tommy out of the way, fearing he might expose the truth. In 2022, the FBI conducted a 5-day investigation into Crystal's disappearance, returning to the Ballard family farm to search for more evidence. The FBI aimed to collect evidence to hold the person responsible for Crystal's disappearance accountable. Although the FBI did not disclose whether any valuable evidence was found, a spokesperson confirmed in October 2022 that all collected evidence would be analyzed at the FBI's lab in Quantico as the investigation into Crystal's disappearance continued. The Attorney General of Kentucky made the crucial decision to appoint a special prosecutor to help with the prosecution of criminal charges related to the deaths of Crystal Rogers and her father, Tommy Ballard. Crystal's mother, Sherry Ballard, knew about the appointment and strongly supported it, believing it was necessary to ensure justice for her loved ones. Sheri Ballard recognized the importance of appointing a special prosecutor to handle the complex case of Crystal and Tommy's deaths. This dedicated team of prosecutors brought a fresh perspective and independent expertise, allowing for a more detailed and comprehensive understanding of the case. With a special prosecutor on board, Sheri Ballard was confident that there would be greater attention to detail and a more thorough investigation. She believed this would ultimately lead to a stronger case in court and thus justice for the victims' families. The appointment of a special prosecutor also sent a clear message that the justice system took the case seriously and was committed to holding those responsible accountable. In July 2023, a Kentucky grand jury indicted 32-year-old Joseph Lawson on conspiracy to commit murder and tampering with physical evidence, both charges related to Crystal's disappearance. 2 months later, Crystal's boyfriend, Brooks, was arrested and charged with murder and tampering with physical evidence. The judge set Brooks' bond at $10 million and ordered him to have no contact with Crystal's family. Notably, Brooks had a prior arrest in 2022 for multiple traffic violations, resulting in a series of fines before his release. When Brooks was arrested for Crystal's murder, the people of Bardstown felt a mix of emotions. While the news was devastating, it brought a sense of relief and closure to finally know what had happened to Crystal and that justice was being pursued. The arrest brought a sense of satisfaction, knowing the person responsible for her death was being held accountable. For those affected by her tragic death, the arrest provided some comfort and solace. The Bardstown community rallied around Crystal's family, offering support and solidarity during this difficult time. They hoped the arrest would lead to a fair and just punishment for the perpetrator, and that justice would finally be served. As the investigation progressed, the community remained hopeful for justice. Brooks Ha's virtual court appearance in October 2023 brought new revelations, including a potential link to an unsolved Bardstown murder. Prosecutors believe the same gun was used in Tommy Ballard's death and Crystal's father's murder, and are testing it. The victims' families expressed relief and hope for justice. When the special prosecutor presented allegations, Rosemary Brooks and Nick Ha's mother declined to respond to any questions. During the court hearing, the prosecutor further accused the Hal family of secretly recording the grand jury proceedings. The prosecutor alleged that Brooks H's sister, brother, mother, brother-in-law, and mother's boyfriend were all involved in this illegal activity. According to the prosecutor, the Hal family aimed to gain an unfair advantage and ensure their stories remained consistent by secretly recording the proceedings. Brooks H's attorneys filed a request to remove the Nelson County judge overseeing the case and replace him. The attorneys argue that the judge has demonstrated bias against Brooks Ha since 2017, which they believe is unfair. Additionally, the attorneys claim that the $10 million bail is excessive and should be reevaluated. They contend that a biased judge will significantly hinder Brooks's ability to receive a fair trial, citing the judge's previous comments and actions as evidence of partiality. In addition to seeking disqualification of the current judge, the attorneys have urged the court to expedite its ruling on this matter. They argue that timely action is crucial and a new, impartial judge should be appointed as soon as possible to ensure a fair and just outcome. Following a period of several weeks, the Kentucky Appeals Court has ruled that Brooks Ha will remain in jail on a $10 million bond. Furthermore, the court has issued a ruling on the case, formally rejecting Ha's request to dismiss the presiding judge overseeing Brooks's trials. In December 2023, Stephen Lawson was formally charged with 2 counts of conspiracy to commit murder and tampering with physical evidence. It was widely reported in the media that Stephen Lawson has a son, Joseph Lawson, who was arrested in connection with the disappearance of Crystal. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Kathy Martin. Kathy Martin was born on October 25, 1959, in Houston, Texas, and grew up in a loving family where she was especially close to her sister. In high school, she met Mike, and a few years later, they tied the knot. The couple settled in a quiet Houston suburb where they soon started a family with the birth of their daughter. 3 years later, Kathy became pregnant again, and in early 1987, they welcomed a son. At just 27 years old, Kathy was now a mother of 2. After her second child was born, Kathy dedicated herself to full-time motherhood, focusing on raising her children. Mike worked at his father-in-law's small sign factory, providing a stable income for the family. Kathy's parents also offered financial support, enabling her to devote all her time to the kids. On March 3, 1987, Kathy was at home with the children as usual, while Mike was at work. After his shift ended, he decided to meet up with friends and headed to a bar. Mike attempted to call his wife from a payphone, but she didn't answer, a rare occurrence, as Kathy rarely had the chance to leave the house even for a few minutes. Mike tried calling her several more times, but still got no response. Worried, Mike called their neighbor, Tim, and asked him to check on Kathy. Tim went to their house and knocked on the door, but received no answer. Peering through the living room window, he noticed the TV was on, so he persisted in knocking, but there was only silence. Tim's concern grew that something might have happened to Kathy. Rather than returning home to call Mike or the police, he got in his car and drove around town searching for patrol officers. After a few minutes of driving, he spotted a police car and explained the situation to the officers, requesting they check on Kathy. When the police arrived at the house and received no response to their knock, they tried the door handle and found it unlocked. Upon entering the house, they immediately found Kathy's daughter lying on the living room sofa, unconscious and displaying visible signs of trauma, but still alive. The officers quickly called for an ambulance and continued to inspect the other rooms. In the bedroom, the officers found the younger child in his crib, safe and unharmed. However, in another room, they were met with a gruesome scene. Kathy lay on the floor, bloodied and lifeless. She was naked, and the police quickly determined that she was the victim of a heinous crime. Her hands were bound with a lamp cord, a disturbing indicator of the brutality she had endured. The paramedics rushed Kathy's daughter to the hospital, and the investigators began meticulously examining the crime scene. Kathy's father arrived shortly after, but the police withheld the details of the tragedy from him. Instead, they requested that he go to the hospital to be with his granddaughter when she awoke. As Kathy's father waited at the hospital, he was shocked to learn about his daughter's murder from a news report on TV. Meanwhile, Mike arrived at the house, and the police were immediately struck by his suspicious behavior. Not only did he show up late, but there were also telltale bloodstains on his shirt. The police asked him to surrender his clothes and answer their questions, their scrutiny intensifying with each passing moment. Investigators made several intriguing discoveries. Firstly, they found numerous bloodstains in the bathroom, indicating that the perpetrator had attempted to clean up the crime scene. This suggested that the attacker had lingered in the house for some time rather than fleeing immediately after the murder. Secondly, forensic experts detected no signs of forced entry. All windows and doors, except the front door, were locked, implying that Kathy either let the attacker in voluntarily or they had a key. The police also observed another peculiar detail. All of Kathy's clothes were neatly folded on the floor beside her body. This not only hinted at the possibility of sexual assault, but also seemed strange that the attacker had taken the time to fold her clothes with such care. The detectives hypothesized that the assailant might have threatened to harm her children if she screamed or refused to comply with their demands. Kathy may have acquiesced to their demands solely to protect her children, only to be killed afterwards. Kathy's daughter was fighting for her life after being brutally beaten, likely with bare hands. After several hours in the hospital, she fell into a coma, and her chances of survival remained dire. Medical experts examined Kathy's body and determined that she had suffered 16 stab wounds, primarily in the abdominal area. They also confirmed that she had been sexually assaulted and managed to extract biological material from the perpetrator. However, during that time, DNA analysis was not yet widely used in forensic science, so the experts could only determine the perpetrator's blood type. From the early hours of the investigation, the police zeroed in on the victim's husband, Mike, after noticing suspicious stains on his shirt. They seized his clothing for examination, and Mike's behavior that evening also raised eyebrows. After work, he went out with friends, but instead of going home, he asked a neighbor, Tim, to check on his wife, a tactic detectives had seen before, where a husband committed the murder and created an alibi. The police also uncovered that Mike had a checkered past. Right after high school, he was arrested for selling drugs to an undercover cop and was sentenced to 6 years in prison, although he only served 2 before being released on parole. Later, he married Kathy, but the police needed more evidence to charge him. The detectives also launched an investigation into Tim, the neighbor, whose behavior seemed suspicious. Rather than calling the police from his home, he drove around town searching for patrol officers. A search of Tim's car revealed suspicious stains on the floor mats that resembled blood. Forensic experts determined that Kathy's death had occurred around 10 p.m., approximately 6 hours before her body was discovered. This led the detectives to probe the suspect's whereabouts long before the evening and their actions after the murder. Both Mike and Tim claimed to have been at work, prompting the police to verify their alibis. 2 days after the murder, the hospital contacted the detectives with a breakthrough. Kathy's daughter had suddenly regained consciousness, and her life was no longer in danger. Investigators rushed to interview her, hoping she could provide insight into the events, but the 4-year-old girl had almost completely lost her memory of that day. She vaguely recalled a man with light hair entering their house, though both her father and Tim had dark hair. The detectives received an unexpected update from the lab, forcing them to reassess the case. The experts' analysis revealed that the stains on the neighbor's car mats were mere machine oil, and those on the husband's shirt were just paint. Furthermore, multiple colleagues of Mike and Tim, who worked in different fields, corroborated that the 2 men had been at their workplaces all day and hadn't left until evening. This eliminated both men as suspects, as they hadn't had the opportunity to commit the crime at Kathy's house. The police, who had been convinced of one of the suspects' involvement, found themselves back at the starting point. They refocused on other potential suspects familiar with the victim and capable of entering her house without raising suspicions. As detectives questioned Kathy's relatives and friends, asking who they thought might be responsible, they discovered an intriguing pattern. Many of them, without hesitation, named one person, Greg. Greg, Kathy's brother-in-law, was flagged as a suspect due to his troublesome behavior, which her loved ones revealed she had frequently complained about. According to Kathy, Greg would openly flirt with her and persistently try to persuade her into intimate encounters. Moreover, he would often make inappropriate remarks about her stomach, a detail that aligned with the majority of stab wounds being located in that area. The police investigation uncovered Greg's history of illegal substance abuse and criminal past, prompting detectives to focus on him. They soon found a promising lead, a fingerprint and hair at Kathy's house matching Greg's. However, this evidence was not conclusive, as Greg regularly visited Kathy and her husband, potentially leaving behind the prints and hair prior to the murder. Kathy's parents were convinced of Greg's guilt. Her mother shared a telling anecdote. During a late-night hospital visit with her granddaughter, Greg appeared, causing the girl to glance at her grandmother with an unmistakable look of fear. After hearing this testimony, the detectives summoned Greg for questioning. He categorically denied any involvement in the murder, claiming to have been with a friend at the time, a friend with a notable criminal record. Mid-interrogation, Greg requested a brief absence to pay for additional parking time, allegedly to avoid a ticket, but he never returned to the station. Greg's wife's sister later recounted that on the day of the murder, Greg dropped her off at work around 10:30 a.m. and picked her up at 2:30 p.m., leaving him a 4-hour window that coincided with the time of the murder, providing a plausible opportunity to kill Kathy. Despite these suspicious circumstances, the police still lacked concrete evidence to link Greg to the crime. As a last resort, they decided to analyze the semen sample taken from the victim's body. At the time, forensic experts could only determine the blood type of the sample's owner. The blood type of the sample from Kathy's body matched Greg's, but this finding did not conclusively prove his guilt. Investigators were unable to make an arrest based on the available evidence, prompting a continued search for additional proof. However, despite their efforts, they were ultimately unable to prove Greg's involvement. The case eventually stalled, leaving Kathy's family frustrated and convinced of Greg's guilt, yet powerless to act. Meanwhile, Shelley, Kathy's sister, refused to accept that her husband was capable of such a heinous crime and chose. Empowered by the cellmate's testimony, the detectives confronted Greg, and this time, he finally broke down and confessed. He acknowledged his guilt in Kathy's murder, repeating the same admission he had made to his cellmate. Subsequently, he pleaded guilty in court and was handed a 45-year prison sentence, though he ultimately served only 4 years before succumbing to liver cancer at the age of 56. Kathy's husband, Mike, tragically didn't live to see the day of the killer's arrest, passing away at the age of 45. Her children and parents expressed gratitude to the detectives for finally bringing the case to a close, albeit 15 years later. Throughout that long and arduous wait, they had been almost certain that Greg was the perpetrator, yet they were forced to watch him continue living with their second daughter, powerless to intervene.